Chapter 524. Geor Chapter 482. The dwarves are very rich. You've made the right and wise decision, Shea. Sophie was holding a goose feather pen in her right hand and an account book in her left hand. Her delicate and pretty face was without makeup, and her hair was tied into a knot behind her head. She was sitting in the Commander-in-Chief's tent that originally belonged to Shea. In fact, this tent had long since become Sophie's territory. Ever since Shea appointed her as his chief of staff, Shea had simply left this place to her to manage. When he returned from the dwarves' encampment, the first thing he did was run here to discuss the matter with Sophie. Shea had come up with the idea on a whim regarding the deal with the dwarf. Originally, Shea had only wanted the dwarves' promise to sell the subterranean beasts. But after leaving the dwarves' encampment, the more he thought about it, the more he felt that it wasn't a good idea. At present, the biggest problem restricting the development of his new power was the lack of financial resources. Money. If he didn't have money, then there was no need to talk about expanding his power. Moore and Ilton were both major grain-producing regions. In the past, their main source of income was agricultural income. The grain produced here was abundant and would be purchased by the Empire's central treasury every year. Grain merchants from all over the country would also purchase the grain. Perhaps it was the blessing of the gods, but in recent years, the Byzantine Empire's political situation could be said to be unstable. The various warlords were divided and the central authority was extremely weak. They had even fought several wars with Odin. But strangely, the Byzantine Empire's territory had a favorable climate every year. There were no droughts or floods, and the grain harvest was bountiful almost every year. As a result, although there were many man-made disasters, there were no natural disasters. It had to be said that this was a great fortune amidst the misfortune. Therefore, even though the political situation was unstable, and even though the Empire had just gone through a period of war, the overall price of grain in the Empire didn't rise as much as it would in a truly chaotic era. Although the price of grain did rise, mainly because the warlords had begun to stockpile grain in preparation for war, and because of the impact of war on productivity and other factors, the price of grain did rise a little. But it didn't reach an excessive number. All in all, it was still stable. This was a good thing, but for Shea, as the warlord of a grain-producing region, he could not count on making a fortune by selling grain. From the looks of it, the war had caused a lot of damage to the area under his rule, and the financial income was almost dried up. Now, a large amount of land had been in theft to the families of the military, and the soldiers who had received the land began to call for their families to migrate to the north to settle down. It was foreseeable that in the near future, the population in Shea's territory would be greatly restored, and the people who migrated here would quickly regain their productivity. As for the grain-producing region in the north, as long as there were no problems with the weather, they could expect to have a bumper harvest this year. Shea also got a promise from the Odin Emperor that he wouldn't have to worry about Odin's people invading the south again for at least 3 years. As for the other warlords, Shea really didn't care about them. At present, Adrik was preparing for war in the imperial capital, which directly attracted the attention of most of the warlords. For the time being, no one was willing to offend Shea, a rising power in the north. Without the danger of war, Shea could completely expect a bumper harvest this year. But if the price of grain wasn't high, he wouldn't be able to make much profit. Actually, the dwarves are very rich. Sophie put down the pen and account book in her hand, looked at Shea, and slowly said, "For a long time, almost everyone thought that the dwarves were backward and conservative, that these dwarves were very poor. But in fact, everyone was wrong. The dwarves' wealth is far beyond our imagination." Shea nodded. After making a big decision, he really needed a think tank to analyze the prospects and the pros and cons of the matter. The decree of the Byzantine Empire has always prohibited the trading of grain with the dwarves. The dwarves are hostile to humans, but humans are also hostile to the dwarves. Those who are not of our race must have different intentions. This is a principle that almost every race recognizes. Therefore, the Byzantine Empire has always prohibited the sale of grain to the dwarves, because grain is a strategic reserve. What's even more ridiculous is that in some peaceful times, the Byzantine Empire would rather export grain to the Ottoman Empire than to sell to the dwarves. The dwarves are also unwilling to sell their ironware to humans on a large scale for the same reason. It has to be said that there are historical reasons for this phenomenon. But in fact, this situation has been somewhat loosened in recent years, especially the central government that was almost unable to breathe under the pressure of the Tema military district. Because of the separation of the various warlords, the financial income has been decreasing, and at the same time, the central army has to be maintained to ensure the deterrence of the warlords. The decrease in financial income and the huge military expenditure have become an irreconcilable contradiction. Our teacher Cavasher has actually proposed a few years ago that in order to obtain more financial income, the empire should consider lifting the ban on grain to the dwarf. This proposal is extremely beneficial to the central government of the empire. The few large grain-producing counties in the north are all close to the wildfire plains. If they want to trade with the dwarves, it is very convenient in terms of geography. However, it was a pity that the teacher's suggestion was met with firm opposition from almost everyone. Not only were the warlords in control of the military opposed, but even the royalist aristocratic groups were unanimously opposed. The opposition was so strong that even Emperor Cantos could not ignore it and could only give up on teacher Cavasher's proposal. Why is that? Shea was puzzled. I can understand the opposition of the warlords. They are afraid that the central government's financial income will increase because of the grain trade. But why are those royalist aristocratic groups so opposed? Are they not willing to see the central government's power increase? Sophie smiled. This girl's smile was very cold. Why? In short, because of one word, greed. Shea frowned. Sophie looked at Shea. You really don't understand? Sir General, please think about it carefully. Shea looked at Sophie's seemingly profound expression, and after pondering for a moment, he finally sighed. I understand. He sneered. It is indeed because of greed, foolish greed. This was actually not too hard to guess. It must be known that although the empire had always imposed a grain embargo on the dwarves, the official decree was one thing. But in the dark, many merchant groups were secretly conducting illegal grain smuggling business with the dwarves. And it was precisely because of the grain embargo that the price of grain smuggling was getting higher and higher, and the profits were also getting bigger and bigger. Those large merchant groups of the empire, which one of them did not have a strong background of aristocratic families. It could be said that almost all large merchant groups belonged to some rich aristocratic families. On the surface, it was forbidden to trade grain with the dwarves, but these merchant groups could rely on the protection of those behind them to secretly smuggle grain and make a fortune. Didn't Rock just say it himself? The price that Shea gave Rock was more than twice the current price of grain in the Byzantine Empire, and Rock himself admitted that when those black-hearted merchant groups traded grain with the dwarves, the transaction price would add a zero to Shea's price. What a frightening profit! This secret grain smuggling business, how many rich aristocratic families' interests were tied up in it? If the empire suddenly lifted the grain embargo, then, from then on, the dwarves could openly import grain from the Byzantine Empire. The dwarves would naturally not buy grain from those black-hearted merchant groups at high prices. Those aristocratic families would definitely not tolerate such a situation. Old Emperor, there is no way to deal with this situation? Those rich aristocratic families can threaten the Emperor and have no choice but to suffer in silence? Shea frowned. In essence, the Emperor is the biggest aristocrat, and the stability of the imperial power requires the support of the aristocratic class, plus the coercion of the warlords. If the imperial power is to be maintained, the Emperor needs the support of the aristocratic class. In this case, the emperor is not willing to offend so many aristocratic families because of this matter. So, at this point, Sophie sighed, to some extent, Teacher Cavashier also completely gave up his original fantasy of the emperor and the aristocratic class after this matter. In the past, he still hoped to use a series of methods to improve and refresh the empire and let it return to a healthy track. But after this matter, Teacher often sighed. This empire has already rotted from the roots, and mere improvements can no longer save the empire's fate. If we want to change it, we can only carry out a complete and huge revolution, a huge storm of cleansing. Shea wasn't too interested in what huge revolution, cleansing, and the like. His current interest was only in the grain trade with the dwarf. I hope the dwarves' trade can bring us some financial income. I just said, Sir General, these dwarves are richer than you think. Sophie's tone was somewhat proud when she said this. Rich? Shea was the first to not believe it. That fellow Rock was dressed in rags and had a dirty appearance. He really didn't look like a rich man. The dwarves have been mining for generations, and they have an outstanding innate ability to detect metal ores. Their mining ability is first class, and their smelting technology far surpasses us humans. When I said the dwarves are rich, I was referring to something special. You have to know, if we talk about other aspects, such as food, clothing, and housing, even the king of the dwarves can't compare to an ordinary human aristocrat. Because of the racial gap, the dwarves are unable to obtain large amounts of luxuries made by humans. They may dress poorly, eat poorly, live in caves, and may even store less food than an ordinary human farmer. But, if we talk about the storage of metal ores, I'm afraid it will be an astronomical figure that you can't even dream of. Shea immediately opened his eyes wide. The mountains of the Wildfire Plains are rich in all kinds of metal ores, iron ores, copper ores, and even gold and silver ores. The dwarves have been doing one thing for generations, and that is to desperately dig out these things. But they are unable to conduct large-scale trade with other races, so even if they dig out the metal ores, they can only store them in their huge caves after refining them. You can imagine how much wealth they have accumulated over the generations. Shea's eyes began to turn red. The dwarves' food is much more expensive than metal. To the dwarves, metal is worthless. But I think that for you, General Shea, metal is something you need very much. To expand your strength, you need a large amount of iron, copper, gold, and silver. I think I made a huge mistake. Shea lowered his head and sighed. I should have talked to you first before going to trade with the dwarves. Now that you've said it, I found that the price I offered was really too low. If that's the case, the profit is too little. A small stream flows along stream. Sophie lightly said, if you want to get huge profits, then you will be like those black-hearted merchants, unable to gain the dwarves' trust. Even if the trade is profitable for a while, in the long run, they will fall out with you sooner or later. At that time, you won't be able to buy the things you need from the dwarves. Of course, your asking price is indeed a bit low. Although we are not as black-hearted as those Chamber of Commerce, but you can break the Empire's embargo and openly sell food to the dwarves. You have to bear a lot of pressure. These sacrifices have to be exchanged for some price. Therefore, I have a way to increase your profits. You have another way? Shea's eyes lit up. It's very simple. The price you promised them doesn't need to be changed, but when we do trade, we can divide the different types of food into different grades. Black beans, yellow beans, and green beans naturally have different prices. The lowest grade of black beans can be sold at the low price you offered, but yellow beans and green beans will naturally have to be sold at a higher price. There's also wheat, barley, wheat, rye, coarse wheat, and refined wheat. It's impossible to sell them all at the same price. I think you can understand what I mean. At that time, there will be a lot of profit. After a pause, Sophie said in a very cold tone, don't forget, the dwarves are also divided into nobles and commoners. Those dwarven commoners will be satisfied with ordinary black beans and coarse wheat, but what about those dwarven nobles? Those dwarven tribal nobles, even their royal family, will not be satisfied with inferior food. And you know, the nobles of any race are often a group of people who are willing to spend a lot of money for enjoyment. Right, in the dwarven territory, I heard that a barrel of good human brewed wine can be exchanged for the same amount of gold. Of course, this kind of trade can only be done with the dwarven nobles. I don't need to teach you the details. Shea laughed. This country bumpkin was suddenly full of confidence. We don't know how to do other things, but this kind of thing is our old profession. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support legal reading. Chapter 525. You've made the right and wise decision, Shea. Sophie was holding a goose feather pen in her right hand and an account book in her left hand. Her delicate and pretty face was without makeup, and her hair was tied into a knot at the back of her head. She was sitting in the Commander-in-Chief's tent that originally belonged to Shea. In fact, this tent had long since become Sophie's territory. Ever since Shea had appointed her as his chief of staff, Shea had simply left this place to her to manage. After returning from the dwarves' camp, he'd immediately rushed here to discuss the matter with Sophie. Shea had come up with the idea on a whim regarding the deal with the dwarf. Originally, he'd only wanted the dwarf's promise to sell the subterranean beast. However, the more Shea thought about it, the more he felt that it wasn't a good idea after all. At present, the biggest problem restricting the development of his new power was the lack of financial resources. Money. If he didn't have money, then there was no need to talk about expanding his power. Moore County and Ilton County were both major grain-producing regions. In the past, the main source of their financial income was agricultural income. The grain produced here would be purchased by the Empire's central treasury every year. Some grain merchants from various regions would also purchase the grain. Perhaps it was the blessing of the gods, but the Byzantine Empire's political situation had been unstable in recent years. The various warlords had divided their territories, and the centralization of power was extremely weak. They'd even fought a few wars with Odin. Strangely, however, the Byzantine Empire's territory had good weather every year. There were no droughts or floods, and they'd have a bumper harvest almost every year. As such, although there were many man-made disasters, there were no natural disasters. It had to be said that this was a blessing in disguise. Therefore, even though the political situation was unstable, and even though they'd just gone through a period of war, the overall price of grain in the empire didn't rise as much as it would in a truly chaotic era. Although the price of grain had risen, mainly because the various warlords had begun to stockpile grain in preparation for war, as well as the impact of war on productivity and other factors, the price of grain had indeed risen a little. However, it hadn't reached an outrageous number. All in all, it was still stable. This was a good thing, but for Shea, as the warlord of a grain-producing region, he could not count on making a fortune by selling grain. From the looks of it, the war had caused a lot of damage to the area under his rule, and the financial income was almost dried up. Now, a large amount of land had been in theft to the families of the military, and the soldiers who had received the land began to call for their families to migrate to the north to settle down. It was foreseeable that in the near future, the population in Shea's territory would be greatly restored, and the people who migrated here would quickly regain their productivity. As for the grain-producing region in the north, as long as there were no problems with the weather, they could expect to have a bumper harvest this year. Shea also received a promise from the Odin Emperor that he would not have to worry about Odin's people invading the south again for at least 3 years. As for the other warlords, Shea really didn't care about them. At present, Adrik was preparing for war in the imperial capital, which directly attracted the attention of most of the warlords. For the time being, no one was willing to offend Shea, a rising power in the north. Without the danger of war, Shea could completely expect a bumper harvest this year. But if the price of grain wasn't high, he really wouldn't make much money. Actually, the dwarves are very rich. Sophie put down the pen and account book in her hand, looked at Shea, and slowly said, "For a long time, almost everyone thought that the dwarves were backward and conservative, that these dwarves were very poor. In fact, everyone was wrong. The wealth of the dwarves is far beyond our imagination." Shea nodded. After making a big decision, he really needed a think tank to analyze the prospects and the pros and cons of the matter. The decree of the Byzantine Empire has always prohibited the trading of grain with the dwarves. The dwarves are hostile to humans, but humans are also hostile to the dwarves. Those who are not of our race must have different intentions. This is a principle that almost every race recognizes. Therefore, the Byzantine Empire has always prohibited the sale of grain to the dwarves, because grain is a strategic reserve. What's even more ridiculous is that in some peaceful times, the Byzantine Empire would rather export grain to the Ottoman Empire than sell grain to the dwarves. And the dwarves are also unwilling to sell their ironware on a large scale to humans for the same reason. It has to be said that there are historical reasons for this phenomenon. But in fact, this situation has been somewhat loosened in recent years, especially the central government that was almost unable to breathe under the pressure of the Tema military district. Because of the separation of the various warlords, the financial income has been decreasing, and at the same time, the central army has to be maintained to ensure the deterrence of the warlords. The decrease in financial income and the huge military expenditure have become an irreconcilable contradiction. Our teacher Cavasher has actually proposed a few years ago that in order to obtain more financial income, the empire should consider lifting the ban on grain to the dwarf. This proposal is extremely beneficial to the central government of the empire. The few large grain-producing counties in the north are all close to the wildfire plains. If they want to trade with the dwarves, it is very convenient in terms of geography. However, it was a pity that the teacher's suggestion was met with firm opposition from almost everyone. Not only were the warlords in control of the military opposed, but even the royalist aristocratic groups were unanimously opposed. The opposition was so strong that even Emperor Cantos could not ignore it and could only give up on teacher Cavasher's proposal. Why is that? Shea was puzzled. I can understand the opposition of the warlords. They are afraid that the central government's financial income will increase because of the grain trade. But why are those royalist aristocratic groups so opposed? Are they not willing to see the central government's power increase? Sophie smiled. This girl's smile was very cold. Why? In short, because of one word, greed. Shea frowned. Sophie looked at Shea. You really don't understand? Sir General, please think about it carefully. Shea looked at Sophie's seemingly profound expression, and after pondering for a moment, he finally sighed. I understand. He sneered. It is indeed because of greed, foolish greed. This was actually not too hard to guess. It must be known that although the Empire had always imposed a grain embargo on the dwarves, the official decree was one thing. But in the dark, many merchant groups were secretly conducting illegal grain smuggling business with the dwarves. And it was precisely because of the grain embargo that the price of grain smuggling was getting higher and higher, and the profits were also getting bigger and bigger. Those large merchant groups of the empire, which one of them did not have a strong background of aristocratic families. It could be said that almost all large merchant groups belonged to some rich aristocratic families. On the surface, it was forbidden to trade grain with the dwarves, but these merchant groups could rely on the protection of those behind them to secretly smuggle grain and make a fortune. Didn't Rock just say it himself? The price that Shea gave Rock was more than twice the current price of grain in the Byzantine Empire, and Rock himself admitted that when those black-hearted merchant groups traded grain with the dwarves, the transaction price would add a zero to Shea's price. What a frightening profit! This secret grain smuggling business, how many rich aristocratic families' interests were tied up in it? If the Empire suddenly lifted the grain embargo, then, from then on, the dwarves could openly import grain from the Byzantine Empire. Naturally, the dwarves would no longer buy grain from those black-hearted merchant groups at a high price. Those rich aristocratic families would absolutely not tolerate such a situation. Old Emperor, there is no way to deal with this situation? Those rich aristocratic families can threaten the Emperor and force him to have no choice but to suffer in silence? Shea frowned. In essence, the Emperor is the biggest aristocrat, and the stability of the imperial power requires the support of the aristocratic class, plus the coercion of the warlords. If the imperial power is to be maintained, the Emperor needs the support of the aristocratic class. In this case, the Emperor is unwilling to offend so many rich aristocratic families because of this matter. So, at this point, Sophie sighed, to some extent, Teacher Cavashir also completely gave up his original fantasy of the Emperor and the aristocratic class after this matter. In the past, he still hoped to use a series of methods to improve and refresh the Empire, and put it back on a healthy track. But after this matter, Teacher often sighed. This Empire has already rotted from the roots, and mere improvement is already unable to save the Empire's fate. If we want to change it, we can only carry out a complete and huge revolution, a huge storm of cleansing. Shea wasn't too interested in what huge revolution, a storm of cleansing, and the like. His current interest was only in the grain trade with the dwarf. I hope the dwarves' trade can bring us some financial income. I just said, Sir General, these dwarves are richer than you think, Sophie said with a somewhat proud tone. Rich? Shea was the first to not believe it. That fellow Rock was dressed in rags and had a dirty appearance. He really didn't look like a rich man. The dwarves have been engaged in mining for generations, and they have an outstanding innate ability to detect metal ores. Moreover, their mining ability is first class, and their smelting technology far surpasses that of us humans. When I said the dwarves are rich, I was referring specifically. You have to know that if we talk about other aspects, such as food, clothing, and housing, even the king of the dwarves can't compare to an ordinary human noble. Because of the racial gap, the dwarves are unable to obtain large amounts of luxuries made by humans. They may dress poorly, eat poorly, live in caves, and may even store less food than an ordinary human farmer. But, if we talk about the storage of metal ores, I'm afraid it will be an astronomical figure that you can't even dream of. Shea immediately opened his eyes wide. The mountains of the Wildfire Plains are rich in all kinds of metal ores, iron ores, copper ores, and even gold and silver ores. The dwarves have been doing one thing for generations, and that is to desperately excavate these things. But they are unable to conduct large-scale trade with other races, so even if they excavate the metal ores, they can only store them in their huge caves after refining them. You can imagine how much wealth they have accumulated over the generations. Shea's eyes began to turn red. The dwarves' food is much more expensive than metal. To the dwarves, metal is worthless. But I think that for you, General Shea, metal is something you need very much. To expand your strength, you need a large amount of iron, copper, gold, and silver. I think I made a huge mistake. Shea lowered his head and sighed. I should have talked to you first before going to trade with the dwarves. Now that you've said it, I found that the price I offered was really too low. If that's the case, the profit is too little. A small stream flows long, Sophie lightly said. If you want to obtain huge profits, then you will be like those black-hearted merchants, unable to obtain the dwarves' trust. Even if the trade is profitable for a while, in the long run, they will sooner or later fall out with you. At that time, you won't be able to buy the things you need from the dwarves. Of course, your asking price is indeed a bit low. Although we are not as black-hearted as those Chamber of Commerce, but you can break the Empire's embargo and openly sell food to the dwarves. You have to bear a lot of pressure. These sacrifices have to be exchanged for some price. Therefore, I have a way to increase your profits. You have another way? Shea's eyes lit up. It's very simple. The price you promise them doesn't need to be changed, but when we do trade, we can differentiate the different types of food into different grades. Black beans, yellow beans, and green beans, the prices are naturally different. The lowest grade of black beans can be sold at the low price you offered, but yellow beans and green beans will naturally have to be sold at a higher price. Hee. There's also wheat, barley, wheat, rye, coarse wheat, and refined wheat. It's impossible to sell them all at the same price. Hee, I think you can understand what I mean. At that time, there will be a lot of profit. After a pause, Sophie said in a very cold tone, "Don't forget, there is also a distinction between nobles and commoners among the dwarves. Those dwarven commoners will be satisfied with ordinary black beans and coarse wheat, but what about the dwarven nobles? The tribal nobles among the dwarves, and even their royal family, will not be satisfied with inferior food. And you know, the nobles of any race are often a group of people who are willing to spend a lot of money for enjoyment. By the way, in the dwarves' territory, I heard that a barrel of good wine brewed by humans can be exchanged for an equivalent amount of gold. Of course, this kind of trade can only be done with the dwarven nobles. I don't need to teach you the details." Shea laughed, and the country bumpkins were suddenly full of confidence. "We don't know how to do other things, but this kind of thing is our old profession. Special notice. Tomorrow is the Dragon Boat Festival, so we have a day off, so there will be no updates tomorrow, hee. In addition, I wish everyone a happy holiday and eat more rice dumplings. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com, support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 526. Hee, how was the Dragon Boat Festival, everyone? I ate a lot of dumplings. Dumplings made by my mother are the best. Enough with the nonsense. Here's a 9,000-word chapter. Chapter 483, Heaven's Will. After leaving Sophie's place, Shea was full of energy. He was thinking about how to extort a large sum of money from those rich dwarves. But as soon as he walked out, a cool breeze brushed past his heated head and calmed him down. Shea helplessly realized that his most fundamental problem still hadn't been solved, his mount. His original plan was to get a dragon knight. Screw that. Recalling Merlin's words, Shea shuddered violently. Don't ever mention it again. Then, he wanted to use a subterranean beast to make up the numbers. But as they talked, he suddenly thought of forming a subterranean beast heavy infantry unit. Then, they talked about trading grain with the dwarves to make money. Everything seemed to be going well, but in the end, the problem of Shea's mount still hadn't been solved. Helplessly, Shea returned to the city. Sitting on his horse, he walked along the streets in a daze. But in the end, he couldn't think of anything. The subterranean beasts were indeed too slow. There were too many drawbacks to using them as cavalry mount. How was he going to find something that could carry heavy loads and run? Preferably, something that looked a little flashy to be his mount? Dragon. Dragons were still the most tempting. But what else could it be? It would be best if it could fly. Shea thought fiercely. Because he had the idea of a dragon knight, Shea subconsciously raised his standards. If he couldn't get a dragon as a mount, then the substitute couldn't be too bad, right? He walked along the streets without deliberately controlling his horse. By the time he raised his head, he found that he had arrived at a secluded street. The bodyguards behind him loyally followed behind Shea's horse. The general didn't say anything and only focused on moving forward. These bodyguards naturally followed in silence all the way, and no one opened their mouth to say anything. But when Shea looked at the street in front of him, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. This street was originally secluded, and at this time, the intersection of the street was also guarded by the city's soldiers dispatched by ship. Almost half of the street had been cleared. This was because the person living on this street was the most distinguished guest in Denzel City. The current Empress, Her Highness Daphne. To be honest, Shea was somewhat reluctant to meet with Daphne. No matter how thick-skinned a country bumpkin was, he couldn't bring himself to lose face in front of this beautiful Empress. Daphne saved her life. But he didn't forget he had accidentally reached Daphne's. The second time they met was in Daphne's residence on this street in Denzel City. In the end, Shea accidentally hugged Daphne and used his evil claws to grab Daphne's buttocks. The feel of it is quite good. An absurd thought appeared in the country bumpkin's mind. Because the 2 times they were alone, the process was not very satisfactory, so after that, Shea tried his best to avoid meeting this Her Highness the Empress. It had been so long since he returned to Denzel City, but he had yet to meet with the Empress. Logically speaking, as a subject, he should have an audience with the Empress. It would appear that Daphne had the same idea as Shea. She was trying her best to avoid meeting with this country bumpkin. When Shea went to war, Daphne stayed in the garrison to accompany the poor thing. However, when Shea returned, Daphne immediately moved back to her residence. Truth be told, this Empress was a problem for Daphne. Back in the imperial capital, when he met the young emperor, Garcia had avoided talking about the Empress. The Rabbit Emperor clearly knew that his wife was staying with Daphne, but he did not even ask about it. His attitude was ambiguous. Since the Emperor did not ask about it, it was clear that his attitude was unclear. Daphne could not rashly deal with such a sensitive person. Shea remembered that after the incident, Dora had said to him in his mind, "Clearly, the Emperor does not want the Empress to return." Does not want the Empress to return? That left Shea at a loss. Fine, the Emperor was a rabbit. He did not want the Empress to return to his side, lest she become an eyesore. That was understandable. However, leaving her here with Lao Tzu would be a problem. In the end, Shea simply avoided meeting her, treating her as if she did not exist in the city. At any rate, Daphne now had a large family business. Feeding an idle person was not an issue, or besides, that woman did not have a big appetite. The horse had already arrived at the entrance of the small courtyard where the Empress lived. When the guards at the entrance saw the arrival of their highest-ranking officer, they immediately lined up to welcome him. Looking at the guards standing in 2 rows with their backs straight, Shea blushed. He was too embarrassed to say that he had accidentally walked in here. After muttering to himself for a while, Daphne sat on the horse and said in a deep voice, "How is the situation?" The leader of the guards was a straightforward soldier. He said loudly, "General, don't worry. There is absolutely no problem with safety. We have guarded this place very well. Normally, no one would come in and out. Yes, the person inside is an important guest of our military region. You must guard this place with the greatest loyalty. There must not be any mistakes." Shea lectured with a straight face. These soldiers usually did not have the opportunity to see this Daphne general. Now that they were being lectured by their highest-ranking officer, they were naturally so excited that their faces flushed red. Their bodies were tense and straight. They were all full of energy and wanted to shout loudly in response, "Yes!" Their voices were so loud that Shea almost jumped in fright. At this time, a girl's head popped out from the courtyard door. She looked outside and saw that the guards were lined up outside. Shea was sitting on the horse and lecturing with a face full of awe-inspiring righteousness. The young girl's face immediately paled. She cried out in alarm and hurriedly went back inside. Shea recognized that she was one of the maids he had sent. He had brought so many maids from the imperial capital. Most of them had already regained their freedom and were betrothed to the soldiers in the army. There were also a few who were willing to stay in the general's residence as attendants. Shea did not have the habit of being served by these delicate women. Apart from the maids personally bestowed by Emperor Garcia to serve the poor thing, the rest were arranged to serve the Empress. Anyway, the Empress was of noble status. It was good to arrange for some maids to serve her. The maid was startled by the formation outside the door. She ran in and cried out in alarm. Immediately there was a commotion inside. Some maids even screamed. Shea sighed. Damn it, he had no choice but to show up now. Sure enough, after a while, the door opened again. A young maid slowly walked out. Her figure was light and her steps were somewhat delicate. With one look, one could tell that she was well trained. She first bowed gently and then said in a respectful voice, "Her Highness heard that the general had come to visit." She asked the general to come in to talk. Shea laughed bitterly. He could only put on the appearance of a subject. He got off the horse and bowed. "Yes, please report that Garrison General Shea Thunder requests an audience with Her Highness the Empress." "General, there is no need to be so polite. Her Highness invited you in. You can follow me." Saying this, the maid leaned sideways and welcomed Shea into the door. Moreover, all the way, she was slightly leaning sideways as she led the way in front of him. To be honest, this kind of walking posture, especially for a girl, looked very good. However, it was definitely very tiring to walk. Shea followed behind for a while and smiled. "You can walk faster. Walk straight. There is no need to be polite with me." The maid's face turned pale. She quickly bowed and said, "I don't dare. What is my status? How would I dare to turn my back to General? You can." Shea sighed and followed the girl inside. When he reached the door of the hall, he heard a faint and cold voice from inside. "General Shea, are you bullying my little maid who doesn't know anything?" Shea's face turned red. He thought that he was just being kind. Why did this woman say that he was an evil uncle who bullied little girls? And this woman's ears are so sharp. Walking in with his head held high, he saw that Queen Daphne was already neatly dressed and seated in the hall. There was a large couch placed on top of the couch, and Daphne sat there, her slender back straight, her delicate figure appearing delicate and beautiful. However, this time, the queen didn't wear her white nightgown. Instead, she wore a very large ceremonial robe. The black robe made her look bright and cold. Her long golden hair hung down the robe, making her look even more pitiful and moving. That beautiful face was a little pale. It was obvious that her complexion wasn't too good. Moreover, there was a hint of melancholy in her eyes. Shea looked carefully. Although the queen was sitting there in a dignified and elegant manner, even her face was expressionless. She looked cold and graceful. However, her hands were clasped together at her waist. Her slender fingers were tightly intertwined. Her fingers were slightly pale. It was obvious that she was nervous. "She seems to be afraid when she sees me." This was Shea's first thought. The two looked at each other for a while without speaking. After a few glances, Shea was surprised to find that the queen's cheeks suddenly turned red. That's strange. What Shea didn't know was that Daphne was of noble status. When had she ever been stared at by a man with such unscrupulous eyes? Even the young nobles in the imperial capital who admired her appearance would only look at her casually due to their status. They would be polite and courteous. Shea, on the other hand, was looking at her with a pair of bull-like eyes. It was a big loss. Daphne was secretly resentful. "I've seen this guy a few times. He's getting more and more powerful, and his title is getting higher and higher. But he's still so rude and impolite. Every time he sees me, he's always staring at others." Clearing her throat, Daphne deliberately said in a flat tone, "I wonder why General Shea has come to see me?" "It's nothing. Lao Tzu was just walking around with his eyes closed and accidentally came here." Shea replied inwardly. But he was naturally too embarrassed to say that. He coughed and said in a serious tone, "Your Highness is staying here as a guest. I'm usually busy with military affairs and haven't been able to pay my respects more often. It's already impolite of me. Today, I've specially come to apologize to Your Highness and pay my respects. I wonder if Your Highness is staying here well? Food, lodging, and other necessities, was there anything to be desired? Please tell me. I'll immediately send someone to do as you wish." "No need, General Shea. Everything is fine here." Daphne glared fiercely at Shea. This guy is specially looking for me again? Humph, could it be that he didn't take enough advantage of me last time? He's here again." Her heart was filled with embarrassment and anger. Her cheeks seemed to be dyed with a layer of red, making her look even more charming. Daphne was silent. Shea was also speechless. After standing there awkwardly for a while, Shea braced himself and prepared to leave. But just as he was about to say something, Daphne suddenly spoke up in a whisper, "General Shea, I have something to ask you." After hesitating for a moment, Daphne suddenly raised her head and looked at the several maids standing in the hall. She whispered, "I have something to discuss with General Shea. You all can leave first." Shea noticed that the several maids had very appropriately bowed and left. However, one of the maids, when she left, her face was somewhat pale. While walking, her body was somewhat trembling. From time to time, she would steal a glance at him, her eyes full of fear. Damn, could it be that I'm really that good at scaring these little girls? After the girls had left, Daphne raised her head and looked at Shea. She whispered, "General Shea, please sit down." After Shea sat down, Daphne seemed to be hesitating. She wanted to say something but stopped. Shea's heart skipped a beat. Here it comes. Sure enough, whatever I'm afraid of will happen. This Empress is probably going to ask about the imperial capital. General Shea, you've returned victorious from battle and went south to Osgilla to rescue the king. You've been conferred the title of Duke Knots and promoted to General of the Garrison. I haven't had the chance to congratulate you for this contribution. After saying that, Daphne sat down and raised her hands to salute. Shea grinned and casually accepted the salute. Well, our country bumpkin is a little sloppy to be a duke. The etiquette of nobility is something that no etiquette teacher has taught him. Daphne did not mind Shea's lack of etiquette. She said, "I have been in Denzel City for a long time and have not returned home for a long time. I wonder what the current situation in the imperial capital is like. Can you tell me about it?" Shea laughed and pretended to be relaxed. "Rest assured, Your Highness the Empress. This general's army went south and the rebel army has been defeated by General Adric's central army. Under our pincer attack, the rebel army was forced to flee. We killed many of their leaders and captured many of them. It can be considered a great victory. The danger of Osgilla besieging the city has been completely resolved. You don't need to tell me that. The whole city knows about it." Daphne secretly cursed. She secretly gritted her teeth and slowly asked, "I wonder how my family is now?" Shea pondered for a moment and said, "His Excellency the Duke of Minas has closed his doors and will not receive any guests. I have not had the opportunity to meet him. However, I have heard that His Excellency the Duke is very healthy. He can eat and sleep well." Daphne's expression calmed down a little. Shea looked at Daphne's expression and continued, "I have also met your brother, young Lord Rhodey. Rhodey and I have a good relationship. We are both disciples of Teacher Cavishir and can be considered as fellow disciples. His Excellency Rhodey is also very healthy. I have heard that he is also going to join the army and serve the country. That, when I was in Osgilla, I had a deep conversation with His Excellency Rhodey. I was fascinated by His Excellency Rhodey's style. It was a deep conversation. When Rhodey met Lao Tzu, he almost pulled out his sword and had a duel with Lao Tzu. He almost scolded Lao Tzu as a heartless traitor. After hearing that her father and brother were safe and sound, Daphne finally breathed a sigh of relief. Although she had also heard some of these things from the maids who came from the capital, she could only truly feel relieved when she heard it from Shaya, the person involved, personally. Daphne was silent for a moment. She then looked at Shaya and asked, "Then, is there anything else?" "Anything else?" Shaya braced himself and pretended to be ignorant. Daphne's expression was somewhat complicated. She faintly sighed and said, "Shaya." This time, she did not call him General Shaya. Instead, she called him by his name. Shaya suddenly felt a little troubled. "Shaya, you know what I am asking?" Daphne directly asked. "When you met him, did he say anything?" Shaya looked at Daphne. After a moment, he sighed in a low voice and said, "No. No, no." It was unknown whether Daphne's expression was one of joy or anger. It was calm and indifferent. However, it was as though she was recalling those words. The corners of her mouth then curled up into a strange smile. Next, she raised her head and said, "Not a single word?" "Not a single word." Shaya braced himself. "Not a single hint?" "Not a single hint." Since he had already made it clear, Shaya made up his mind. There was no need for him to hide his words. Daphne suddenly let out a long sigh. It sounded like a sigh. It was as though she had suddenly let go of all the worries in her heart. The look in her eyes appeared to be one of helplessness. However, there was also a sense of relief. Shaya felt somewhat sorrowful. This woman is so young. She is truly miserable. "Shaya, do you think, does he know that I am here?" Shaya pondered for a moment before looking straight into Daphne's eyes. "He knows that Adeline is here. He even sent those palace maids over." Those words did not seem to be an answer to the question. However, Daphne was naturally able to understand the meaning behind those words. "You came here with Adeline. Since the Emperor can find out that Adeline is here, how could he not know that you are here as well?" There was no need for him to say those words out loud. Both of them were smart people. Daphne suddenly let out a soft laugh. However, this laugh was very strange. Shaya was unable to understand what it meant. He raised his head and saluted. Then, he braced himself and said, "I still have military matters to attend to. I dare not disturb your Highness' rest. I will take my leave." Daphne gave a soft Shaya got up and left. When he reached the door, Daphne suddenly said, "General Shaya? So, what do you plan to do with me?" "Your Highness is joking." Shaya turned around and said seriously, "You are the Empress. I am your subject. How can you say, 'do with me'?" "He has already treated me as if I do not exist. There is no need to mention my identity as the Empress. What I want to know is, what do you plan to do with me?" Shaya gave a wry smile and scratched his head. "That you can stay here with peace of mind. I do not lack food and clothing here. It is just one more mouth to feed." When Shaya said this, he felt that he couldn't continue. He simply raised his hand, turned around and left. This time, when he walked out of the hall, Daphne's voice did not come from behind him. Shaya walked out, feeling a sense of relief. Finally, another matter was resolved. However, when he came out, the Empress didn't ask him to stay any longer. Shaya's heart was still faintly disappointed. Shaking his head, he strode out of the courtyard. When he reached the door, Shaya stood on the steps and looked at the soldiers standing in formation. He said loudly, "Listen up. You must guard this place carefully and attentively. Do not be negligent. If any accident happens, you will be punished according to military law. It will not be light." Shaya had just said that when he suddenly heard a scream coming from the courtyard behind him. Then, he heard a maid cry out anxiously, "Your Highness! Your Highness!" Then, there was a shrill cry, "Your Highness has fainted! Someone come! Ah! Help! Your Highness can't hold on! Your Highness!" Shaya's complexion suddenly changed, and he quickly turned around and rushed in. Shea flew into the hall like a gust of wind. He saw that the hall was in chaos. Several maids were kneeling on the ground, crying in panic. Daphne was lying under her seat, her body on the ground, curled up into a ball. Her face was pale, white foam was coming out from the corner of her mouth. Her eyes were closed and her face was full of pain. She had already lost consciousness. Some of the maids were crying in panic, some were shaking Daphne's hand, and some were running out of the room. Shea came in and almost knocked over two maids. Then, he rushed to Daphne's side. He raised his hand and pushed away one of the maids who was grabbing Daphne's sleeve. He shouted, "Get out of the way!" Daphne's face was full of pain. Her originally beautiful face had turned frighteningly green. Her eyes were closed and her teeth were clenched tightly. Her body was shivering as though she was in great pain. Shea's eyes suddenly flashed with a bright light. This was clearly a sign of poisoning. She actually committed suicide. Was it because of what he said just now that she felt despair and chose to end her own life? That was really dangerous. If he had walked a few steps faster, he might not have made it back in time. Shea's guards had already followed in. Shea turned and shouted, "Pull these people away! Don't crowd around here!" The guards were like wolves and tigers. They pulled the girls to the side, and soon the space in the middle was empty. Shea had already pinched Daphne's sharp chin with one hand, and with a slight force, he opened her tightly clenched teeth. The corners of Daphne's mouth were already full of white foam, flowing out along one side. Shea used to be a hunter in the mountains for many years, and had a good understanding of all kinds of plants. He opened Daphne's eyelids and felt her wrist for a pulse. He understood a little. "Bring water!" Shea turned his head and shouted. The maids were already flustered and at a loss. No one answered, but one of Shea's guards immediately ran outside and came back with a bowl in a short while. Shea took it and frowned. "Not enough. Bring a bucket of water. Hurry!" By the time the guard came back with a bucket of water, Daphne's breathing had already begun to weaken. Shea sighed. He used one hand to help the girl up and let her lean on his thigh. Then, with his other hand, he poured the bowl of cold water into her mouth. Only a small portion of the water was poured in. Most of it was spilled. However, Shea's movements didn't stop. He kept pouring out bowl after bowl of water from the bucket next to him and poured it into Daphne. After pouring 7 to 8 bowls in one breath, Daphne's face was covered with tears and snot. Finally, Shea supported Daphne. Then, his hand landed on Daphne's chest and pressed down slightly. "Wah!" Daphne opened her mouth and vomited out a lump of filth mixed with water. Quite a bit of it even landed on Shea's body. At this moment, Shea didn't pay attention to this. He waited for Daphne to vomit a few mouthfuls. When she was almost done vomiting, he picked up the bowl and poured it down again. After repeating this process, Daphne gave him another round of gastric lavage. After vomiting 2 or 3 times, the only thing she vomited out was clear water. Clearly, her stomach had been emptied. Only then did Shea nod. He carried Daphne to the side. Seeing that Daphne's complexion had improved slightly, her breathing had also calmed down. Shea was afraid that she would not be able to vomit all out. Ignoring the difference between men and women, he reached out with his finger into Daphne's mouth. After confirming that there was nothing in her mouth and that she would not be able to vomit anything else, Shea released Daphne and let her lie down. "Call a doctor," Shea said in a low voice. "I have already called one." A guard behind him immediately replied. Shea breathed a sigh of relief. Through his past life, he knew some emergency treatment methods after being poisoned. Moreover, he could tell that Daphne must have consumed some kind of poison for his method of washing her stomach with water to work. If it was a poison blade, then this method would not work. Unexpectedly, this human woman is quite unyielding. Knowing that she was abandoned, she immediately chose to commit suicide. In his mind, Dora gave a faint sigh. Suicide. Shea's eyes suddenly flashed with a vicious glint. Not suicide. He stood up and looked around the room. Then, he said coldly, when I first came in, I also thought that it was suicide. But now, it seems that is not the case. Humph. Shea's vicious gaze swept around the room. He was a great general who had taken countless lives. Normally, he would be carefree. However, when he suddenly turned vicious, the killing intent in his eyes caused the young maidservants in the room to tremble in fear. You. Stand up and talk. Shea pointed at the young maidservant who had brought him in to meet Daphne. The young girl appeared to be no more than 14 or 15 years old. She appeared very innocent. At that moment she was so scared that she was trembling. When Shea pointed at her, the young girl nearly fainted. Do not be afraid. I will only ask you a few questions. Answer me honestly and everything will be fine. Shea took a deep breath and regarded the young girl. Additionally, I will reward you handsomely. Do you understand? Understood. The young girl appeared as though she was on the verge of tears. Let me ask you, Her Highness, did she eat something just now? Her Highness. The young girl stammered. Just now, when you came in, Her Highness was preparing to eat. Her Highness, hearing your arrival, stopped eating. Then, she came out to see you. Do not be nervous, do not be afraid. Shea's face softened slightly. Tell me, what did she eat? No, nothing. Her Highness had not even started eating when you came. The young girl's eyes were brimming with tears. Then, she suddenly recalled something. Her Highness, she drank a mouthful of soup. Her Highness has a habit of drinking a bowl of hot soup before eating. She only drank a mouthful. Shea nodded his head. Very well. You are right. There is nothing else for you to do. He turned to look at his bodyguards. The leader of the bodyguards, Huoku, had already understood. He personally walked inside. Moments later, Huoku came out with a bowl of soup and handed it to Shea. The bowl is empty. Shea sneered. Didn't she only drink a mouthful? Since it is empty, someone must have poured it out earlier. He stood before the maids and said coldly, Her Highness, come out to meet me. Who was the one who stayed in the dining hall? No one stayed. The young girl who had led the way answered. Oh, no one stayed. Shea sneered. After circling around the maids twice, his heart suddenly skipped a beat. He suddenly recalled that when he was meeting with Daphne earlier, Daphne had asked the maids to leave. One of them had secretly glanced at him several times. There was a look of fear in her eyes. His heart skipped a beat and he immediately aimed his eyes at the young girl. He slowly walked to stand before her and stared coldly at the person before him. The young girl was slightly older than the other maids. She appeared to be in her 20s. She was very beautiful. However, her eyes were somewhat evasive. When Shea stood before her, the young girl clearly wanted to force herself to remain calm. However, her body was trembling non-stop and she was unable to calm herself down. Why are you doing this? Shea asked coldly. The young girl swallowed her saliva and said with a trembling voice, Sir General, what do you mean? I don't have time to talk nonsense with you. Shea's tone was very cold. You need to know, for me, your life is like an ant. Although I am not a cruel person, when there is a need for me to be ruthless, I will do it even more ruthlessly than the most vicious person in the world. Especially when someone threatens the safety of me and the people around me. Normally, I do not like to do cruel things to girls. However, enemies are an exception. The young girl appeared to be on the verge of collapsing. Do you see the people behind me? My bodyguards are all elites in the army. They are proficient in various methods of killing. They are also proficient in how to torture others and how to inflict the greatest amount of pain. Shea continued coldly, Oh, right? I know, since you dare to do something like this, you must be prepared to die. Perhaps you are not afraid of death, however. I will not let you off so easily. You are part of my team from the imperial capital, right? Along the way, there must be someone who knows you. Even if no one knows you, I will be able to find out who sent you to me. Then, I will send someone to the imperial capital. You know who I am. I am the Duke of the Empire. The current Minister of Military Affairs is my superior. In the imperial capital, if I want to do something, investigating a person is not a difficult matter. Your name, your origin, who is in your family, whether you have parents, siblings, I will be able to investigate all of them clearly. Then, I can easily take all of their lives. Trust me, for me, killing a few people is a simple matter. The young girl's face had turned pale. Her legs went soft and she fell to her knees. Drag her down. I want her to open her mouth and tell me everything within a quarter of an hour, Shea coldly said to the bodyguards. Several bodyguards came forward and dragged the limp maid away. Shea turned to look at the young girl and said, All of you, return to your rooms. Without my orders, no one is allowed to enter or leave. He then turned to the bodyguards and said, From now on, without my orders, not a single bird is allowed to enter or leave this place. After giving those orders, Shea picked up the bowl of soup and sniffed it. Then, he sneered and said, Not bad, they did not directly put in any poison. Instead, they used the blood of a demonic beast. Some of the blood of demonic beasts are poisonous. Directly ingesting it will cause discomfort to the body. In serious cases, it could even lead to death. He shook his head and said, Coming from the imperial capital is a long journey. It would be difficult for them to carry any poison with them. However, this demonic beast blood is something that can be easily found in Denzel City. Thankfully, Lao Tzu had been dealing with the demonic beasts in the mountains since he was 10 years old. The demonic beast blood itself is not very poisonous. However, after drinking it for a long time, once it is digested in the stomach, it will become very difficult to determine. Saying this, Shea suddenly sighed in his heart. Your father, coming here today, it seems that it is God's will. If I hadn't unintentionally come here today, I'm afraid that Daphne would have really been poisoned to death. If you want to know what happens next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 527. GOR Chapter 484 Request. It did not take long for the maidservant, who was sent away by the guard, to report everything. Shea's guard did not actually torture the maidservant. However, she had been scared witless by Shea's imposing manner. Thus, it did not take long for the maidservant to report everything. After receiving the confession, Shea gave it a few glances. Then, his face turned grim. He was seated in the hall, on the seat that Daphne had been sitting on. His hand was holding onto the confession and his face was ashen. Every one of the surrounding guards had grim expressions on their faces. Killing intent filled their faces. Someone actually dared to poison the great general's honored guest in Denzel City. Additionally, all of them knew the identity of Daphne. If an empress were to die in Shea's territory, then as Shea, he would not be able to escape responsibility. No matter what, he would be implicated. Everyone was well aware of the seriousness of this matter. Thus, every single one of the guards had their hands on the hilt of their swords. Their hearts were filled with hatred for a common enemy. As long as the great general gave the order, these men who had fought alongside him on the battlefield would use the swords in their hands to cut down any enemy before them. Finally, after a long period of silence, Shea slowly stood up and walked to the side of the hall. He picked up a lamp placed on the table and burned the confession in his hand. Today's matter, no one is allowed to speak of it. Just treat it as if it never happened. Shea turned his head and looked at the guards behind him. If anyone dares to say even half a word, they will be punished according to military law. All the guards stood solemnly and responded in a heavy tone. Those maidservants. A trace of killing intent flashed through Shea's mind. Truth be told, for a great general like him who had killed countless people, if he wanted to silence them, he could just kill off all the maidservants. However, Shea was silent for a moment. Then, he sighed and said, "Give them a harsh warning. If they dare to say anything, humph. Hawk, I'll leave this matter to you. Also, increase the number of guards here by a small team. They will patrol day and night. From today onwards, everyone who enters and exits here will be strictly checked. Whether it is the cook in the kitchen or the handyman who delivers food, from the steward to the coachman, they will all be thoroughly checked. In the future, the food here must be carefully checked. There must not be any mistake." Huoku immediately agreed. "From today onwards, you will be relieved of your position as the guard captain of the garrison mansion." Shea glanced at Hawk. Hawk's expression changed, and his voice suddenly trembled. "Sir, you don't want me to follow you." Ever since Hawk had witnessed with his own eyes how Shea had fought against 1,000 bandits on the Wildfire Plains, he had already made up his mind to follow his master. Now that he heard Shea's words, the young warrior immediately felt dejected. "Stupid." Shea snorted and looked at Hawk. "You're already so old. How can you stay by my side and be the head of the guards? From today onwards, I appoint you as the public security officer of Denzel City. You will be in charge of the city's public security. Today's matter must raise our vigilance. Hawk, as we grow stronger, there will surely be more people keeping an eye on us. It is inevitable that someone will do something to us. Today we found out that there is a spy hiding here, humph. Can you be sure that there are no spies hiding in other places within Denzel City? Today, the spy had only poisoned the Empress food. What if there are other spies poisoning the city's canals and wells? What if they do something else?" Hawk's face turned cold. "I will leave the public security of Denzel City to you. You will immediately investigate. Focus on the new faces that have recently appeared in the inner city. Also, those who had followed our main force back from Osgilla, investigate them one by one." After a pause, Shea continued, "The public security department is lacking in manpower. I will give you more men. I will give you a warrant. Go to the garrison army and pick out 100 men. You can choose whoever you want. If you want men, I will give you men. If you want equipment, I will give you equipment. I only have one request, and that is to find all the rats and cockroaches that are hiding in our city within a month." In fact, Shea knew in his heart that Hawk was not the best person to do this. Although this young warrior was loyal to him and he was young and energetic, his temperament was too fiery and straightforward. Sending him to investigate the spies within the city might not be enough. Truth be told, Shea had two people in mind who were the most suitable candidates for this task. One was Reinhardt. The young military officer was quick-witted and cold, vicious and merciless. He also knew how to be flexible. However, Reinhardt was also an outstanding military talent. Transferring him out from the military to become the head of the Secret Service was too much of a waste. The second candidate was Dax. He was the legendary spy from Lantis. This was his old profession. However, Dax had been sent to the Besta military district by Shea to act as a liaison. He would not be able to return for the time being. Moreover, Shea did not plan on having Dax do this right from the start. Although he was not too proficient in the essence of being a leader, he at least understood one principle. This kind of secret service must be firmly controlled by the leader at all times. The Secret Service was a freakish organization. If the leader did not have complete control over it, it might instead cause a disaster. That guy Bob of Dax had sufficient ability. However, his loyalty to him was a big question mark. Although Hawk's ability was lacking, his loyalty was not an issue. He would meticulously complete the tasks given to him. Although he was a little careless, he could still complete the task of cleaning up Denzel City for the time being. Huoku will build the framework of the Public Security Bureau, and the people chosen by him will certainly be loyal to him. Then, after Huoku has worked for a period of time, he will establish the organization's unity and cohesion, and complete the establishment of the organization's loyalty to him. Then, he will change the person and let Dax take over. Although Dax's loyalty may not be reliable, but the backbone of the organization is loyal to him, so he can rest assured. Then, let's give our Denzel City a thorough cleaning. A trace of coldness appeared on Shea's face? Truth be told, this matter had touched Shea's reverse scale. An assassination attempt had actually occurred in his territory. Moreover, if he had not accidentally stumbled upon it, Daphne might have really died. This matter brought about a dangerous signal. Unsafe. That's right, unsafe. Even though this was his own headquarters, Shea could not tolerate the appearance of an unsafe signal. What if the maids were not the only spies? What if there were others? Even if Shea himself was powerful and did not fear assassination or poisoning, what about the people around him and his subordinates? The backbone of his subordinates did not possess the same level of ability as him. His future wife was still living in his mansion. Adeline was a weak girl. If someone were to make a move on her, Shea could not imagine such a thing happening. All the maids and servants in Daphne's residence had been subjected to a strict interrogation. The bodyguards had made sure that not even a drop of water could trickle through. This matter was strictly confidential. In order to deal with this matter, Shea had no choice but to stay here for the time being. Before he could ensure that all the servants were clean, Shea would not allow anyone to get close to Daphne. After all, it was clear that this empress was the target of an assassination attempt. Daphne had been carried into her bedroom, where Shea's bodyguards had conducted a strict inspection. The result gave Shea a fright. A needle was found in Daphne's pillow. The needle had been smeared with poison. It was said that Daphne had a habit of taking a nap at noon every day. He could imagine what would happen if she were to return to her room to rest after finishing her meal. If she were to lie down on her bed, then, this discovery shocked Shea greatly. He ordered a strict investigation and finally found out that the people who could enter Daphne's bedroom were Daphne's 2 personal maids. Back then, Daphne and Adeline had come here alone. These 2 personal maids had only recently begun serving her. After the 2 personal maids were thoroughly investigated, one of them finally confessed her crime. The second spy. This result caused Shea to fly into a rage. Haha. Good. What do they take Lao Tzu's headquarters for? For a restaurant? For them to come and go as they please? For them to casually plant people in? Shea was furious. What surprised him even more was that the spy who put the needle in the pillow and the spy who poisoned the soup were not in cahoots. Soon, the second confession was placed before Shea. After reading it, Shea sneered. Very good. This second confession will be kept by the security department. Then, publicly disclose this matter. This spy will be publicly tried and executed. Make this a big deal. Then, what about the first spy who poisoned her? Hawk asked suspiciously. Sigh. Shea sighed and looked at the honest young man. He whispered, Hawk, do you think that the origin of the first spy can be disclosed? The matter of the poisoning can only rot in your stomach. Do not speak of it. Do you understand? Although Hawk was somewhat honest, he was no fool. After thinking about it for a moment, he understood. His face turned pale and he quickly walked out. Humph, what a joke. Whether it is a human or a ghost, all of them are trying to plot against Lao Tzu. The origin of the spy who poisoned the soup in the first confession was something that Shea must never reveal. That was because the maid who poisoned the soup came from the Imperial Palace. Yes, Osjila's Imperial Palace. Shea could not help but feel that he was too naive. The Emperor knew that the Empress was here. Yet, he deliberately chose not to mention it. He had no intention of welcoming the Empress back. Clearly, he did not want his wife to return home. However, since he did not want Diphne to return home, then allowing a living empress to stay in the home of a local aristocrat for a long time was too improper. Thus, the emperor's intentions were clear. He wanted Diphne to die. The spy who poisoned Diphne had infiltrated into the ranks of the maids sent to him by an aristocrat from the imperial capital. Then, she came to Denzel City with a secret mission. When Shea was selecting the maids for Diphne, the spy had displayed a very decent and courteous performance. She appeared well trained and was easily selected. The result of the interrogation caused Shea to become furious. There was actually a scandal involved. The task of selecting the maids for Diphne had been assigned to one of the stewards in the mansion by Shea. In order to ensure that she would be selected to serve the empress, the spy had bribed the steward. Since she came from the imperial capital, it was impossible for her to bring any valuables with her. Thus, she had used her body to bribe the steward. That confession caused Shea to become extremely furious. All this time, he had placed enough trust in the people around him. Most of the attendants in his house were from the military. He would also select some of the retired soldiers who were injured in battle and arrange for them to be stewards or attendants in his house. This could be considered as giving these people a way out in life. The steward who was bribed was an injured retired military officer. Arrest her. Interrogate her according to the rules. Sentence her according to the rules. Do not indulge her and do not deliberately increase the punishment. Shea's tone was powerless. This matter made Shea very angry and annoyed. He was angry because he didn't fight, and lamented his misfortune. As for the second spy, her background caused Shea to laugh out in anger. The second spy was actually from the rebel warlord party. The chairman of the Red Round Table Conference, someone sent by Salvador's forces. Those damned rebels! To think that they would so quickly set their sights on Lao Tzu. Shea was furious. That is normal. Dora spoke out coldly within his mind. You have been in the limelight for so long. You have made such a big contribution in the war. You defeated Odin's army and recovered 2 counties of the empire. Adding your original Moor County, you now have the territory and population of 3 counties. Your strength is already second to none in the northern part of the empire. Additionally, you have also made a contribution when you went south to save the emperor. Osgilla had heavily wounded the rebel army during the battle outside the city. It is only natural that the rebel army would hate you to the bone. Dora's explanation was very reasonable. If the emperor can find out that the empress is here, why would the rebel army not know? You have been conferred the title of duke by the imperial family and the position of general of the northern garrison. You are General Adric's direct subordinate. Adric will be the vanguard of the empire in eliminating the rebel army. As for you, as the general of the northern garrison, the rebel army had deduced that you will definitely participate in the battle. Thus, you are a great enemy. Since they know that the empress is staying here, the rebel army will naturally make a move on this matter. Think about it, if the assassination is successful and the empress dies here, the relationship between you and the imperial family will be broken. Even if you two had maintained a harmonious relationship before, once the news of the empress dying here is revealed, even if the imperial family does not want to punish you, such a big matter with such a huge impact, they will have to deal with it. When the time comes, I understand. Shea took a deep breath. This idea is very smart. Dora sighed as well and praised. Not only will it break the relationship between you and the imperial family, if the imperial family has no choice but to punish you for this matter, then Adric will become dissatisfied. Everyone knows that you are Adric's subordinate. Once Adric becomes dissatisfied, then it will further break the relationship between Adric and the imperial family. Just think about it, if this matter succeeds, it will bring a lot of benefits to the rebel army. Humph, if you want to make a move on Lao Tzu, then you must be prepared for Lao Tzu's retaliation. Shea spat out fiercely. Then, he sneered and said, however, El Salvador did help me out. He had given the order to keep the matter of the imperial family's spy being poisoned a secret because it would cause a huge scandal. At present, he had no plans to completely break off his relationship with the imperial family. Thus, this matter could not be made public. However, the Salvadoran rebel army's spy was a different story. The assassination attempt by the rebel army's spy must not only be made public, it must also be made as big as possible. This was also one of Shea's plans. Didn't you, Emperor Garcia, refuse to admit that the Empress is here? Didn't you deliberately ignore it? Are you deliberately playing dumb? Very well. Lao Tzu wants you to be unable to keep up the act. Spread the news that the rebel army had sent a spy to assassinate the Empress, who is temporarily staying in Denzel City. Once this matter is made public, the little emperor will no longer be able to pretend that he does not know that the Empress is here. But, if you do that, you will force the emperor to send someone to bring this girl back. Dora's voice was filled with suspicion. The emperor wants to kill her. You know very well that, if he brings this girl back, she will die. It won't be that easy. I am not so heartless as to send her back to her death. Shea rubbed his chin and sneered. I will not let her go back. I will turn this matter into a thorn and stick it into the little emperor's throat so that he can neither spit it out nor swallow it. It was at that moment that one of his bodyguards came to report. General, Empress, Her Highness, she has woken up. She requests to see you immediately. Shea's face turned solemn and he nodded. Very well, I will go over now. And what did the doctor say? The bodyguard replied. The doctor was chased out of the room by the Empress. Her Highness said that she will only meet you and no one else. Shea had a strange expression on his face. He could only follow the bodyguard to Daphne's bedroom at the back. The bedroom was in a mess because it had been thoroughly searched by the bodyguards earlier. Daphne was lying on the bed, her face still pale. When Shea walked in, Daphne was staring blankly at the ceiling with her charming eyes. Hearing Shea's deliberate footsteps, Daphne lowered her eyelids and glanced at Shea. What a melancholy expression! Shea sighed inwardly. He walked to the bed and bowed. Your Highness, no need to be so polite, General Shea. Daphne's pale face squeezed out a bitter smile. I know. You saved me again. Including this time, I already owe you twice for saving my life. I won't say any more words of thanks. I will write a letter home. My father and brother will give you a huge reward. Shea smiled bitterly. There is no need to say anything about the reward. You are the Empress and I am your subject. Moreover, you are Adeline's good friend. She came north from the imperial capital to find me. It was you who took care of her along the way. That's enough, Shea. Daphne's tone suddenly became very soft and she whispered. There is no need to say any more words of thanks. I invited you in because I want to ask you something. Please. Daphne's voice trembled. Please, send someone to send me back to the imperial capital. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 528. Sweat. This is a classic case of breaking one's promise. Last night, I drank and ended up getting drunk, and then, I jumped. Sigh. Hangover is very painful. My stomach feels very uncomfortable, and my head hurts. I really want to swear for the nth time that I'll quit drinking and so on. But after thinking about it, I feel that even for someone as thick-skinned as me, I really can't say something as shameless as quit drinking. Forget it. GOR Chapter 485 will never happen again. Have you gone mad? After hearing Daphne's request, Shea was silent for a moment. Then, he did not hesitate to shout out. His pair of sharp eyes stared at Daphne. Or do you simply want to die? If you want to die, it is easy. There is no need to go through the trouble of returning to the imperial capital. I can just give you a rope, and you can strangle yourself to death at any time. As he said those words, there was a hint of viciousness in his voice. Daphne was lying on the bed, her delicate body slightly curled up. The woman had already sat up. Both her hands were wrapped around her knees as she rested her head upon them. Her pair of enchanting eyes stared unblinkingly at Shea. Daphne did not say anything. Shea's words were like a punch to the air. He panted angrily before looking deeply at Daphne. Then, he took a deep breath and said, "I am sorry, Your Highness. This subject has been rude." At a time like this, Shea, are you still going to talk to me about the position of a subject? Daphne finally opened her mouth. Her voice was very soft and sad. You already know. Shea narrowed his eyes. You know, the one who poisoned you is, I know. Daphne's face was pale. Even her originally rosy lips had lost their color. She bit her lips and whispered, I know, he wants me dead. And yet, you still want to go back? Shea blurted out. Shea, you don't understand. Daphne stared intently at Shea. Her voice was soft, but her tone was solemn. Behind me there is still a family. There's also a noble surname called Minas. Shea didn't say anything. I am the queen, and also a member of the Minas family. If he wants me to die, I can die. But I can't die outside the imperial capital. As the empress, I have to die in the imperial capital. Even if it's a lousy excuse, I have to die in the imperial capital, in the imperial palace, or die of illness or accidentally fall to death. Then, even if I die, I will still be the empress, and can still bring glory to my family and my surname. However, if I were to die outside without any clear reason, even without a clear explanation, Shea, do you understand what kind of impact this will have on my family? This will bring shame to my family name. Truth be told, although Shea could understand the meaning behind Daphne's words, he could not truly understand it. After all, the so-called glory of the family is something a country bumpkin like us could never hope to achieve. He was just a single person. He didn't have any heavy family halo or title behind him, and no one wanted him to bear the burden of fighting for the family's glory. Of course, apart from the Tulip family that founded the country. Although it was now confirmed that the dead old drunkard was 90% likely a descendant of the Tulip family, Shea didn't intend to follow in his father's footsteps and complete the restoration of the Tulip family's glory. In fact, he even suspected that the old drunkard himself was not too interested in this so-called mission. He had never been tied down by the burden of a family. Perhaps, after he had made a name for himself, he might be able to create a great and glorious family. But for now, this country bumpkin was glad that he did not have to bear such a heavy burden. So, you want to go back. You want to go back to Osgilla, then go back to the imperial palace and quietly wait for that rabbit to kill you? Shea was so annoyed that he did not even hesitate to say the word rabbit. I will accept this. This is my fate. When Daphne said this, her heart seemed to have died. Fuck fate. Shea suddenly shouted at Daphne. I'll tell you. Women. In this world, Lao Tzu can believe in anything, but there are a few things that I have always treated as bullshit. The first is God. The second is that bullshit fate you speak of. Never, never, never. There is no such thing as fate. That is just an excuse that the cowardly poor thing found for himself. Shea was so angry that he was like an angry lion. He paced back and forth in the room a few times, waiting for Daphne on the bed. He fiercely said, Don't even think about it. Don't even think about it. You are Lao Tzu's guest. If I send you to your death, what kind of person would Lao Tzu become? What's more, you're Adeline's friend. If I send you to your death without doing anything, that woman will definitely come after me. If you die, I'm afraid she'll go blind from crying. You want to die a cowardly death, but I don't want to be laughed at by others. If I send you to your death, what will others think of me? My life and death has nothing to do with you." Daphne suddenly mustered up courage from who knows where and shouted at Shea. She clenched her fists and looked at Shea fearlessly. "Aha! Angry?" Shea was so angry that he laughed. Yes. Good. That's the look in your eyes, that's the temper. That's the courage. You should use that courage to fight against that bullshit fate you speak of. Instead of standing here and glaring at me, your savior. You don't understand. Shea, you don't understand." Daphne's emotions suddenly broke down. Her eyes quickly filled with tears, which then flowed down her cheeks. Her sobbing voice was desolate and somewhat shrill. "You don't understand. Shea, you don't understand." Daphne's voice trembled and she sobbed. "Who am I? I am Daphne? Minas. I am the daughter of the Duke of Minas. I was born into the noblest family in the world. I am a noble that everyone envies. Since I was 13 years old, the eyes of all the men who see me will reveal desire and greed. Some of them are greedy for my beauty, some are greedy for my family background. What I eat and use are the most luxurious and exquisite things. I can get the most expensive jewelry in the world. One wheel of the carriage that I ride is equivalent to a middle-class family's annual income. One of my jewelry can buy half a street's worth of houses in the imperial capital. I participate in the highest-class banquets and attend the highest-class venues. Everyone's eyes will be focused on me. It is as though I was born with a halo around me. Everyone will say, look, that is Miss Daphne. She is the daughter of the Duke of Minas. She is the noblest girl in the imperial capital. She is the most beautiful woman in the imperial capital. I have everything. Yes, everything. Shea, do you understand? Everything. Men adore me, women envy me. Everything that I want, as long as I open my mouth, someone will immediately bring it to me. Shea, can you imagine that kind of life? Can you imagine that kind of scene? You are envious, aren't you? Ha 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 ha. The woman began to laugh softly, her laughter tinged with a hint of nervousness. Shea took a deep breath and did not say anything. He simply looked at the woman's face that was filled with tears. Yes, everything, as long as I want it, someone will bring it to me. When I am unhappy, someone will do everything in their power to please me. Do you know? There are chefs who serve me. Just the ones who are responsible for making desserts for me number 6. Their salaries are even higher than that of a middle-class officer in the army. The tailors who are responsible for making my formal attire number an entire small team. Shea, can you imagine what kind of life that is? Shea remained silent. He only looked at Daphne with a gaze that gradually softened, revealing a hint of pity. Before I was 15 years old, I was very happy. I thought that I was the happiest person in the world. I could have everything I wanted. But very soon I realized how laughable everything that I thought was. I was very beautiful. Almost all the men who saw me would compliment my appearance. The maids, servants, my teachers, my personal maids, they would all compliment my appearance almost every day. The men I met would all look at me with that kind of gaze. I once fantasized about my future like an ordinary young girl. Yes, I did fantasize. I also fantasized that there would be a man who would sing to me in the garden outside my bedroom window in the middle of the night with a rose in his mouth. However, back then, I had never met my future husband. I had only heard of all the bad rumors about him. No one asked me if I was willing. No one cared about my will. From that moment on, my love died before it was even born. No man ever expressed his love for me again. Everyone looked at me with reverence. Oh, right. There was also pity and ridicule. Yes. So what if I am noble? So what if I am beautiful? They were laughing at me. They were laughing at the fact that the noblest and most beautiful woman in the imperial capital was going to marry a man who only liked men. I've cried, I've fought, I've struggled, I've resisted. But that powerful father of mine wiped out all my willpower. The personal maid who was willing to help me escape was found out by my father. He ordered her to be beaten to death. If I refused to eat, he ordered the chefs to be punished. He sent an etiquette teacher to teach me the etiquette of the imperial court. He taught me everything I needed to know to become the future empress: how to speak, how to walk, how to sit, and even how to eat. And all of this was because the family needed me to do this. Shea, do you understand? I seem to possess all the glory of this world mountain. I am rich, noble, beautiful, but I do not have love. I am a woman, but I do not have a lover. Even my maid can have a tryst with the coachman she loves, get married and have children. I do not have that kind of power. I am like a product with a label on it. The label warns everyone to stay away from me because I have already been sold. Yes, I found out how childish I was. Everything I have is just to give this product a beautiful packaging. My beautiful clothes, expensive jewelry, food and use are all the best. It was just to package me into a beautiful product so that I could be sold to the imperial family. My father, I thought he loved me, but he was the one who sold me. He sold his biological daughter, his only daughter, as a product. He sold me in exchange for the glory of the family. He warned me, he scolded me, and in the end, he even put down his pride and begged me. He said he had no other choice. For the sake of the family, he had to sacrifice me. He tried to make me understand his difficulties, to make me accept all of this. He told me that only by sacrificing myself for the long-term peace of the family, only by sacrificing myself for the future of my brother, Roddy, only by sacrificing myself for the Mina's family to maintain the glory of the Empire's first-rate wealthy family. Family! Everything is for the sake of the family. Everything is for the sake of the family. Shea silently recited this sentence in his heart. I have already accepted my fate. I cannot resist all of this. I can only silently accept it. Since I am already destined to be a tragedy, I can only sacrifice myself in exchange for greater value. I have to consider my family. If I must die, then let my blood be the final symbol of the family. Because this is my fate. Shea was shocked. Looking at the woman before him, Shea was thoroughly shocked. All this time, in Shea's eyes, this woman known as Daphne was beautiful and noble. Her words and actions were filled with the elegance, generosity and reserve of a wealthy family, even to the point of making others feel reverence for her. At this moment, however, this woman was weeping unscrupulously before him. Her original noble and reserved temperament had disappeared without a trace. The Daphne before him was just a woman. It was very simple. At this moment she was just a woman. A woman who had no one to rely on, a woman who was sad, in pain, weak, and helpless. After hesitating for a moment, Shea sighed and produced a silk handkerchief. He walked to the side of the bed and gently handed it over. The silk handkerchief was handed to Daphne, but she did not take it. She raised her eyes and glanced at the powerful arms stretched out towards her. Suddenly, like a helpless person who had fallen into water, she fiercely hugged Shea's arm with both hands, tightly hugging it to her bosom. Then, her entire body's weight rested on Shea's arm. Finally, Daphne began to wail loudly. She cried so loudly, so heartbroken, and so hopeless. It was as if she wanted to vent all the pain that had accumulated in her heart all these years at this moment. She hugged Shea's arm so tightly that Shea could feel her soft chest pressing against the skin of his arm. However, at this moment, there was no trace of evil in Shea's eyes. Instead, he looked at this woman seriously, his eyes filled with heartfelt pity. He slowly reached out with his other hand and placed it on Daphne's hair. He gently stroked and comforted her. Daphne cried for who knows how long. Even Shea was surprised. He was surprised that a woman could cry so much. Finally, the crying gradually weakened. Daphne's voice grew softer and softer. She was exhausted and her movements gradually weakened. All right, take a rest. Shea tried his best to use his most gentle voice and said softly, everything will be over, and soon. Please, Shea, please. Perhaps due to her exhaustion, Daphne's voice was somewhat muffled. Shea originally thought that Daphne would say something along the lines of, please help me. However, Daphne's next words were, please send me back. Send me back to Osgilla. Make my sacrifice worthwhile, please. Finally, the young woman was tired. She was simply too tired. The huge outburst earlier had exhausted her body and mind. All her strength had been exhausted and her spirit had dried up. Shea sighed. His hand that was stroking her hair slowly moved to the back of Daphne's neck. Then, he very discreetly pressed down on a certain spot. The young woman finally fell silent. Her body softly fell to the ground, leaning into Shea's arms. Then, her breathing began to calm down. Shea sighed and laid Daphne flat on the bed. He even very carefully spread her hair around the pillow, fearing that she would not sleep well. Finally, he pulled up the blanket and covered her with it. The young woman had already fallen asleep. Her face was still tear-stained and her eyes were red. Her brows were still tightly knitted, faintly carrying the sadness and melancholy of when she was awake. Have a good sleep. Shea stood up and stood beside the bed. Looking at the sleeping young woman, he spoke slowly in a very calm and serious tone. I promise you, everything you said will not happen again. It will not happen again. After saying that, Shea was about to turn and leave. However, just as he was about to move, he suddenly realized that his hand, Daphne, who was sleeping soundly, was still like a helpless child. Her hand tightly held onto Shea's wrist, as if she was a drowning person holding on to the last straw. Even though she was asleep, her fingers did not loosen in the slightest. Shea tried to pull his hand away, but the young woman's grip was too tight. Shea feared that if he were to force her hand away, the sleeping Daphne would wake up again. Country Bumpkin hesitated for a moment. Finally, with a wry smile, he managed to twist half of his body. Then, he pulled a chair from the side of the bed and sat down, his arms still in the same position. Not long after Shea sat down, Daphne, who was sound asleep, seemed to sense something. She was probably able to sense Shea's aura even in her sleep. She actually turned over and moved toward the side of the bed, trying to get as close to Shea as possible. She was still holding on to Shea's wrist. However, when she turned over, her soft hair fell over her delicate face. Some of it even brushed against Shea's arm, making it itchy. Shea smiled and reached out to gently brush away the hair that had fallen over Daphne's face. It won't happen again. This chapter can be considered as paving the way for Daphne's feelings. Ugh. I'm too evil, to be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 529. 7,000-word chapter. GOR Chapter 486. You will find out soon. By the time Daphne woke up, the room was already dark. She raised her eyes to look outside the window, and saw that it was also dark outside. It would appear that it was already night-time. Her eyes were still a little sore and swollen. It seemed that she had fallen into a deep sleep after crying. Her eyes were still a little sore and uncomfortable. After waking up from her dream, Daphne was still in a daze. She took a deep breath to clear her head. Then, she subconsciously tried to sit up. But as soon as he moved, he immediately realized that he was still hugging something tightly in his arms. She turned her head to look again. This time, Daphne nearly cried out in shock. Thankfully, that cry of surprise was only able to reach her mouth before she forced it down. However, within the darkness, her pretty face had instantly turned red. Her present posture was simply too embarrassing. She was lying on the bed, but her body was curled up into a ball, tightly leaning against the side of the bed that was facing outward. Her arms were tightly hugging Shea's arm. Hugging Shea's thick arm in her arms seemed to give her a faint sense of security and reliance. Her body, even her own, was tightly pressed against the other party's. The thing that caused Daphne to blush even more was the fact that her head was on the verge of leaning against Shea's thigh. Her heart began pounding rapidly and Daphne felt her throat becoming somewhat dry. For a moment, she was at a loss. She did not know if she was dreaming or not, however. Regardless of whether she was awake or dreaming, she should not be in such an intimate position with that person. Thankfully, Daphne gave Shea a deep look and saw that although she had woken up, this fellow's eyes were still closed. Shea's breathing was very even and his body was leaning against the chair. His mouth was slightly open and he appeared to be snoring softly. However, the way he was sitting was somewhat uncomfortable. His body was leaning against the back of the chair, yet he was unable to settle down. Instead, he had to stretch out his arm for her to hug. Such an awkward posture. He must have been having a very uncomfortable sleep. He slept for an entire day and stayed here to accompany me and take care of me? In this uncomfortable position, in order to let me hug his arm, he endured for such a long time. For a moment, such a thought appeared in her mind, causing her heart to soften rapidly. She tried to let go of Shea's arm, but the two were too close to each other. She was worried that if she moved, Shea would wake up. Such an embarrassing position. It would be fine if they were asleep and unaware, but if they woke up like this, she would not be able to face anyone in the future. He was afraid that he wouldn't even be able to raise his head in front of this Shea. What made Daphne's face burn even more was that she could clearly feel Shea's arm being held so tightly in her embrace that she could feel the soft fullness of her breasts tightly pressed against his arm. This feeling made Daphne feel dizzy for a moment. This was something she had never experienced in her life. Suddenly, a bold thought appeared in her mind. If I continue to close my eyes and sleep, then I can continue to maintain this position. This feeling of security and dependence, the thought that suddenly popped up in her mind scared Daphne silly. Then, she reminded herself fiercely. Even she was embarrassed by this thought. Daphne, what kind of nonsense are you thinking about? Remember your status. You are the Empress, you have a husband. Your every move affects the honor of the Minas family. How can you have such shameless thoughts? Don't forget, this man is your best friend's fiancé. He is not your man. No. However, this feeling was really comfortable. With such a strong arm in her embrace, it was as if she had someone to rely on. With such a strong person by her side, even when she was asleep, she felt so safe for some reason. Her mind suddenly recalled that day when Shea returned in triumph. Under the city gates of Denzel City, he was so high-spirited and arrogant. He hugged Adeline in his arms and used such a bold tone, as if announcing to the whole world, "She is my woman. There has never been a man who did this to me, never. Daphne was conflicted in her heart. She didn't know whether she should let go or not, but subconsciously, as if it was an instinctive action, she hugged the arm in her embrace even tighter. Finally, just as Daphne's heart was about to jump out of her throat, a voice that almost made her suffocate rang out in the darkness. What is it? Nightmare? It was Shea's voice. Upon hearing this voice, Daphne immediately screamed and quickly flung Shea's arm away. Her heart almost stopped beating at this moment. Shea withdrew his arm and touched his chin awkwardly. In fact, he was not in a deep sleep. With his cultivation, even if he was asleep, he would have woken up as long as there was a slight movement around him. Not long after Daphne woke up, Shea sensed it. The country bumpkin also felt a little embarrassed. Even though he was such a carefree person, he also understood that such an attitude was somewhat inappropriate. However, Daphne's arms were hugging him tighter and tighter, and Shea sensed it. He knew that this woman had woken up, but in such a situation, to let the girl speak first and throw the pressure and responsibility to the woman was not Shea's style, so he chose to take the initiative. No, no. After Daphne screamed, she quickly spoke, but unfortunately, she spoke too quickly, or perhaps because she was too nervous, she almost choked on her own saliva. She clutched her chest and coughed violently. Shea did not say anything. Instead, he stood up and brought a glass of water to the bed. Don't panic. Drink, slowly. After hesitating for a moment, Daphne took the glass and gulped down a mouthful of water. Then, she gradually calmed down. Are you hungry? Shea's voice sounded exceptionally gentle in the dark room. Perhaps it was Daphne's imagination, but at this moment she really felt that way. Daphne did not answer. Shea smiled bitterly. You didn't eat during the day, and I heard that after crying, you'll be very hungry. You slept for so long, so you must be hungry. With that, Shea turned and left the room. Watching Shea leave, the room was empty. At this moment, Daphne suddenly felt a sense of panic, as if with that man's departure, her heart suddenly became empty. Fortunately, the panic did not last long. Soon, Daphne heard the footsteps that made her feel at ease. Shea re-entered the room, holding a candle in one hand and a plate with some pastries in the other. It's too late. There's no fire in the kitchen, so I only made some pastries. Make do with them first. Shea placed the candle on the table and then walked to the bedside. He naturally stretched out his hand and put his arm behind Daphne's back, helping her up in this half-hugging posture. Shea's action was purely out of habit. He still thought that this woman was in a weakened state after being poisoned during the day. However, after a good night's sleep, Daphne had recovered quite a bit of strength. When Shea's arm came over, Daphne could not think of resisting. It was as if she was so silly and obedient, allowing the man to carry her and sit her up. Then, she let her body lean on his shoulder, as if half of her body was leaning on his embrace. The pastries were already at her mouth when she heard the man's gentle voice. Take a bite. Slow down. Her mind blank, Daphne obediently opened her mouth and took a light bite. The pastries were cold and the taste was very ordinary. However, Daphne felt that all the pastries she had eaten in her life were not as sweet as the cold and dry one in front of her mouth. Unknowingly, the pastries on the plate were all in Daphne's stomach. Even after she had finished eating, Daphne still did not move. Shea could only smile bitterly. Sorry, there's no more. I didn't think you could eat so much. Only then did Daphne wake up, her face flushing red again. I ate a lot? Quite a lot. Shea laughed. Why don't you continue sleeping? There's still some time before dawn. You can't eat too much. If you eat too much, your stomach will hurt when you sleep. Normally, a beautiful girl like Daphne would place great importance on her appearance and figure. She naturally knew that she could not eat before bed. Otherwise, it would not be as simple as stomach pain. That would cause the flesh on the lower abdomen to fall out. A girl's body and appearance were more important than her own life. Normally, Daphne wouldn't eat any food in the 2 hours before she went to bed. But today, lying in Shea's arms, forget the few pastries that Shea brought over, even if Shea brought over a large plate, she would obediently eat it all. I don't want to sleep anymore, Daphne whispered. But even she herself felt that her voice was very much like a whisper. If you don't want to sleep, then let's talk. Just don't cry anymore. Shea chuckled. It's dark now. Everyone is asleep, and only the night guards are outside. If you cry here and others here, they will think that I'm bullying you in your room in the middle of the night. Haha, hearing those words, Daphne's face burned. Fortunately, the candlelight in the room was dim. This fellow should not be able to see it clearly, she comforted herself. Taking a few deep breaths, Daphne forced down the anxiety and distracting thoughts in her heart. Then, she whispered in her calmest voice. Shea, today's matter, can you, today? What's going on today? Shea seemed to be at a loss. Today, the matter of me crying in front of you. Daphne's head hung so low that it almost touched her chest. Ahaha! Shea scratched his head and said, Don't worry, I won't tell anyone. You'd better forget it. Daphne deliberately put on a cold tone. Forget it. Shea appeared to think about it before shaking his head. No, I can't forget it. You. Daphne became anxious. What about me? Shea said in a serious tone. You are my friend. You have so much pain and trouble in your heart. How can I turn a blind eye to it? Forget it after hearing about it? That would be too disloyal of me. At any rate, I will not ignore this matter. How do you plan on handling it? Daphne was somewhat annoyed. Shea simply looked at Daphne without saying anything. Daphne suddenly felt an inexplicable rage within her heart and she blurted out, Do you plan on keeping me in Denzel City forever? Or are you like that Hughes? Have you taken a fancy to my looks and want to take me for yourself? The moment those words left her mouth, Daphne immediately regretted it. She did not understand what was wrong with her. Normally, she would be able to maintain a calm demeanor, putting on a graceful and noble demeanor. However, for some unknown reason, she was unable to calm down in front of this man tonight. Just a few words from him would cause her to become agitated and her mouth to speak without thinking. Truth be told, Shea was not angry. Instead, he sat down on the chair beside the bed. He looked at Daphne and said in a very gentle tone, You are a very beautiful woman. You are very smart and have a very kind personality. If not for those unfortunate things that happened to you, I can only say that your luck is not good enough. That is not necessarily your fate. I believe that there will be many men in this world who will truly love you and want to take you for themselves. Hee. What about you? Do you want that too? It was another sentence that had not gone through his brain. After saying those words, Daphne nearly wanted to dive into the bed. Shea, however, was not embarrassed at all. He smiled calmly and said, I am also a normal man. Any normal man who sees you would think so. After saying that, he paused for a moment. If not for the poor thing, I might really have. Ha. His words were bold, but his tone was calm, which made Daphne feel his magnanimity. This fellow really did not have any evil thoughts towards her. You love Adeline very much, don't you? Of course. Shea immediately nodded seriously. In this world, she is the person I love the most. I know, Daphne said faintly. For her, you threw everything aside and went to the wildfire plains to chase her back. And for her, you even dared to face the divine Emperor Odin. Daphne's heart was suddenly filled with a jealousy that even she herself feared. The thought made her panic. In any case, you can rest assured that what you fear will not happen. Shea's tone was very serious and carried a strong sense of confidence. Although I am not doing too well now, I am confident that I can protect a woman. You can rest assured that with me here, that little emperor will not dare to do anything to you. And don't worry, even if he does send people to take you back, I will beat them all the way back to Osgilla. I believe that with your current power, you can do that, Daphne said faintly. You are the garrison general, with the land and population of several counties, and tens of thousands of soldiers. It can even be said that whether or not his throne can be stable depends on you. But what? Shea smiled. But you are doing this just out of pity for me? Daphne sighed inwardly, but she did not dare to say it out loud. Yes, pity. It should be pity. Otherwise, what else could it be? The one he loves is Adeline, the poor thing, that he said. When he mentioned Adeline's name, his eyes would shine. What am I? At most, I am just a pitiful and miserable woman in his eyes. Out of pity, he helped me, My family. Daphne still wanted to insist. Fuck your bullshit family, Shea said indifferently. What is a family? The meaning of a family should be to care for each other, support each other, and let the members of the family live better lives. If the existence of a family is only to make people suffer and endlessly accept a tragic fate, then that bullshit family can go to hell. Shea looked at Daphne's face. I know your brother. Rhodey is a good person. I believe that if it were him, he would not be willing to let you bear this burden. Looking at Daphne's hesitant expression, Shea smiled. Moreover, the situation is different now. In the past, your family needed a marriage alliance with the imperial family to protect themselves. But now, the imperial family can't even protect themselves. I thought about it. Even if you don't go back, the Emperor would not dare to do anything to your father and brother. He is now alone. What he fears the most is General Adric's influence in the military. In order to balance things out, he might have to respect your father more and use your father's influence in the military. So, you don't have to worry about implicating your family. Speaking up to here, Shea frowned and said, but it is precisely this that puzzles me. Logically speaking, with the Emperor's current situation, he should spend more effort to win over your family. But why does he want to kill you? Saying that, he looked up at Daphne. When I first met you, at the hunting meet by the lake, the person who tried to assassinate you should also be, yes. He sent someone. Daphne did not intend to hide it. Why? Shea smiled bitterly. Even if he doesn't like you, he likes men. But why does he want you dead? Keeping you by his side as a cover is not a bad thing for him. Because Daphne's face suddenly flushed red and she gritted her teeth. Because I saw some of his scandalous deeds. I've seen his ugliest side and I've found out about his shameful deeds. Although he looks very steady, he's actually very extreme. So, he's determined to kill me. As long as I'm alive, he'll be worried that I'll spread his shameful deeds. Then, with his identity and position, he'll become a laughingstock to everyone from then on. He is an emperor. Naturally, he will not allow me to continue living in this world. Scandalous deeds? What scandalous deeds? Shea was curious. You don't ask. In short, it is very, very shameful deeds. Daphne's face was flushed red. She appeared disgusted at the mention of this topic. But more than that, she was embarrassed. Shea vaguely understood. Could it be? He was with some male pet, and you saw it. Daphne gritted her teeth. Under Shea's interrogation, she was forced to reveal something. You should add a word. What word? Guys, Daphne whispered. Male pet, guys, holy shit. Country bumpkin spat out. Male pet, guys? Could it be, this rabbit not only likes men but also groups? Just imagining a group of naked men entangled together. Shea nearly vomited out last night's meal. That's it. And everything else. Daphne's face revealed a look of difficulty. Can you stop asking? When I think of those scenes, I feel disgusted. Could it not be just groups? There are more popular ones? Shea shook his head. This little emperor seems to have a strong taste. Just like that, the two of them chatted for a while. After all, Daphne's body was still weak. After talking for a long time, her spirit was somewhat tired and her eyelids were beginning to droop. But she refused to sleep, nor did she want to show any signs of fatigue. Deep in her heart, there was a thought that she found hard to speak out. If she fell asleep now, he would leave. After all, he could not stay here forever. If she showed any signs of sleepiness, he would definitely leave. Unwilling to let Shea leave, Daphne forced herself to stay awake. But the fatigue and the fact that her body was too weak made it impossible for her to hold on. Not long after, her consciousness began to fade. Unknowingly, she closed her eyes and fell asleep. This time, he slept very soundly. It was not until noon the next day that Daphne woke up. She opened her eyes to see that the room was already bright. She immediately panicked and quickly looked around, looking for Shea's figure. Sure enough, as she expected, there was no sign of that man in the room. For a moment, Daphne could not help but be dazed. Her heart was empty, as if something was missing. Looking at the ceiling, no one knew what the woman was thinking at the moment. Well, last night, he seemed to have said something to me. What was that sentence? Well, yes, he said to live for yourself. Yes, he told me to live for myself, not to think about other things. To live for myself, live for myself? In fact, Shea left much later than Daphne thought. He didn't leave the room until the sun had risen. After going out, he did not immediately leave Daphne's residence. Instead, he took the guards to patrol the surroundings again and ate something himself. By daybreak, Shea had already decided that he couldn't let Daphne continue to live here. For safety's sake, he would take her to his garrison mansion to live. After all, his garrison mansion's safety was still much better. After being busy for a while, he finally had time to rest. Dora's deliberately strange laughter sounded in his mind. Hee hee. Little country bumpkin, I couldn't tell that you really have some skills. Ha 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 ha. If you have something to say, let's talk nicely. Don't be so eccentric. What are you doing, female dragon? You didn't notice it yourself? Dora's voice was a little surprised, and then the female dragon laughed sinisterly. Boy, you've caused a lot of trouble. Don't you know it yourself? Trouble? What trouble? Lao Tzu has a lot of trouble. He has too many debts to worry about. Ha 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 ha. You'll know soon, my cute little country bumpkin. You'll know soon. I tell you, women are the biggest trouble in the world. You'll know soon. Daphne was escorted to Shea's garrison residence to stay with Adeline. Adeline was very nervous about the assassination attempt on Daphne and showed great concern for her good sister. However, Daphne's attitude towards the poor thing was much colder than before. Or rather, she herself felt a little guilty, as if she did not know how she should face this good sister of hers. Could it be that she told her that she had indecent thoughts about her man? Oh God! Am I really an evil, bad woman? The poor thing was not too concerned about Daphne's sudden cold attitude. Probably in his opinion, it was just an abnormal reaction from Daphne after being frightened by the assassination attempt. However, all this had nothing to do with Shea for the time being. Shea began a cleansing operation in Denzel City. That fellow, Hawk, had just taken up the post of Denzel City's security officer. Although he was not very meticulous in his work, he had a vigorous and resolute spirit. After taking up the post for just 2 or 3 days, he had led the security officers to go on a rampage in the city. Sure enough, they had captured many spies and spies from various forces. In fact, this matter was not as difficult as imagined. After all, Denzel City was a small city with a small population. It was not as difficult as imagined to find the foreign faces of the spies. After a little interrogation, Shea's horizons were indeed broadened. Clearly, as a rising figure in the mainland, he had been targeted by various forces. Shea did not know whether to laugh or cry when he found out that among the captured spies, there were actually spies from the Besta military district. For the sake of the beautiful Governor-General's wife, Shea released all the spies from the Besta military district and sent them back. He also wrote a letter to the Governor-General's wife, faintly revealing some dissatisfaction and threats. If the Governor-General's wife did not want to deeply offend him, she should be more restrained in the future. A few days later, something big happened in the garrison mansion. The gate to the backyard was finally opened. Clearly, Merlin's torture of poor Todoro had finally come to an end. Our great wizard Todoro, with his tenacious life force comparable to that of a cockroach, had finally survived Merlin's attack. With a new face, he appeared before Shea. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, Please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 530. 7,000-word chapter. GOR Chapter 487 Shea's weakness, the north-central part of the empire, the city of Newfoundland. Newfoundland was a new name. It was originally the capital city of the prefecture of Acilia. Acilia had been occupied by the Besta military district at the beginning of the Civil War. Later, the Besta military district left the rebel camp and surrendered to the empire's central government. Their surrender was welcomed by the emperor and the empire rewarded them. The empire's central government not only allowed the Besta military district to occupy Acilia, they even allowed Acilia and the former Besta military district to merge into a new Besta region. While this was a reward from the empire's central government for the Besta military district's surrender, it also showed that the empire's central government no longer had any control over local politics. Even if the empire wanted to take back Acilia, they didn't have the power to do so. They had no choice but to acquiesce to this. The beautiful Governor-General's wife of the Besta military district was a woman of great talent and vision. After returning from the north, the new policies were implemented swiftly, and the two prefectures were quickly merged into one. Of course, the Besta people had occupied Acilia for more than half a year, and the internal structure was more or less digested. The official merger this time was just an additional name. Additionally, the Governor-General's wife also moved the capital city of the new region from the original Besta military district to the capital city of Acilia. Acilia had always been rich and the trade routes connected the north and south. It had always been a prosperous place and the capital city was known for its flourishing commerce. The size and population of the city were larger than the capital city of the Besta military district. Moving the capital city there was a very good move. However, the Governor-General's wife's actions had a deeper meaning. Following this, the ruling center was moved over. During this process of moving, there was naturally no lack of internal adjustments and mergers. Through this beautiful governor's wife's superb methods, they were either promoted, demoted, left vacant, roped in, or divided. Soon, the internal cleansing and redistribution of power was completed. The old officials who were secretly loyal to the old Governor-General and supported the pitiful General Lear were all wiped out. Even if there were one or two fish that escaped the net, they were deliberately left untouched by the Governor-General's wife to appease the people and were unable to cause any more trouble. After moving the capital city, the Governor-General's wife issued a decree to change the name of the new capital city to Newfoundland. This name, in Byzantium, meant a new flourishing place. The internal reorganization was gradually completed. Since the Governor-General's wife had swept away all the internal problems, she was naturally ambitious and prepared to do something big. But today, in the new governor's mansion in Newinki, there was a joyous atmosphere from top to bottom. There was not the slightest hint of nervousness. There were lanterns and colored banners everywhere, and even the servants had changed into new clothes, because today was the birthday of the old Governor-General's wife. But these opportunities had been few in recent years. The Governor-General's wife was in charge of affairs. But he still, to Appel's wife was the Governor-General Besta. To appease the Governor-General's wife. Besta was. Those who were observant were well aware that the governor's wife had gradually faded away the old governor's presence. After today, no one knew how long it would take for this old governor to appear again. No matter what, it was the Governor-General's birthday. All the important officials of the Besta group had to attend the banquet to congratulate him. Therefore, the Governor-General's mansion was filled with joyous laughter. The foreign officials who came to congratulate him were naturally received by the Governor-General's trusted stewards. While the front hall was bustling with noise and excitement, in a secluded courtyard behind the Governor-General's mansion, the beautiful Governor-General's wife was looking coldly at the people kneeling in front of her. The Governor-General's wife was dressed in a gorgeous red gown. She was prepared to enter the banquet. Today, she had put on some makeup. She was already beautiful, but now she looked even more charming. But at this moment, the people kneeling in front of her looked as if they were facing a great enemy. Their expressions were stern, and their faces were filled with fear and anxiety. How could they dare to look at her? So, you were chased out with your tails between your legs? The other party caught you, but not only did they not punish you, they even sent you out of the country? And then you came running back with your tails between your legs? The woman's voice was very soft, and the way she spoke seemed to be very slow. However, the people kneeling in front of her were all sweating profusely. These people naturally knew that the more the governor's wife spoke in such a soft voice, the more it indicated the anger in her heart. Very good, you have done well. The Governor-General's wife sighed and deliberately sneered. You have really made me proud. And to think that you are all veterans in this line of work for so many years. You were actually chased out by a few hundred soldiers from some police department in the new city. The people kneeling in front of her were the spies that Shea had purged from Denzel City a few days ago. However, Shea had courteously released these spies from the Besta military region and sent his men to chase them out of the country. The people kneeling in front of her were all trembling. Finally, the leader of the group mustered up the courage to speak up. We have failed in our duties. Originally, we dared not find an excuse to absolve ourselves from this. We are also willing to accept the punishment. However, we have our own difficulties and have no choice but to report this to Madam. Oh? What other excuses do you have? Tell me about it. There was a somewhat lonely look on the Governor-General's wife's face. Yes. The one who spoke up calmed himself down and slowly said, Madam, it is not that we did not do our best. Ever since we infiltrated Denzel City, we have been diligent in our duties. We have not slacked off for even a single day. We have also tried our best to gather information about the Northerners. However, Madam, you are a wise woman. You should understand that Shea Thunder's rise to power is too short. Our infiltration of them has only just begun. His place of governance, Denzel City, is a small city with a population of less than 10,000. Within the city, there are tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians. Every one of them has a registered identity. Normally, when we infiltrate that place, it is still considered safe. However, once the other party begins to investigate, there are not many people there to begin with, and all of them are familiar faces. As outsiders, we are unable to hide ourselves. It is like throwing a few soybeans into a pile of wheat. Our target is too obvious. Hearing that, the Governor-General's wife nodded her head slightly. Finally, she spoke out in a calmer tone. Fine, that is one reason. It is true that Shea Thunder's rise to power is too fast. Your infiltration of him is too short and your foundation is not deep enough. I accept those reasons. However, a dereliction of duty is a dereliction of duty. Those who are chased back will all be demoted by 2 ranks and have their salaries suspended for 1 year. Are you all satisfied with this decision? Hearing the decision, all of them raised their heads and looked at the Governor-General in shock. It was not because the punishment was too heavy. Rather, it was because the punishment was too light. Working in the field of intelligence had always been a dangerous job. The more dangerous the job, the easier it was for them to achieve result. Thus, their promotion had always been quick. Thus, even though they had been demoted by 2 ranks, as long as they worked hard from now on and were lucky, they might be able to rise back up in less than a year. As for the suspension of salaries, everyone knew that those who worked in the field of intelligence did not rely on their salaries to make a living. They relied on funds for their activities. Buying information, befriending members of the enemy forces, and so on, all of these required a lot of money. These people who worked in the intelligence business usually had a lot of money in their hands, who would really lack the income of a few salaries. Thank you, madam, for your leniency. The leader's face was filled with gratitude. We will reformulate the plan. By the end of this year, we will definitely rearrange the route in Moore County. No need. The Governor-General's wife suddenly interrupted him coldly. From this moment onwards, stop all operations against the Northern Army. Those that have yet to be completed, shelve them all. Those that have been discovered, withdraw them. As for those that have not been discovered, and the woman pondered for a moment before saying, withdraw them all as well. From this moment onwards, stop all operations against them. The leader stared at the Governor-General with his mouth agape. Humph, when they captured you, they did not make things difficult for you. Instead, they released you all in one piece. Could it be that you think you haven't embarrassed yourselves enough? You want to go back and ask for more humiliation? You may have the heart to do so, but I am not that thick-skinned. The Governor-General's wife spoke with a ridiculing tone. This time, they released you all because Shea Thunder gave me some face. Otherwise, how could you all still have the life to kneel here and beg for mercy? You would probably have been hung outside the gates of Denzel City. Since the other party had given me some face, I would be too embarrassed to do anything else. Someone like Shea, if he is truly angered, I fear that he would do anything. Now is not the time to make an enemy out of the Northerners. This matter will end here. After saying that, the woman waved her hand and said, everyone, leave, you stay behind. Her final words were directed at the leader. The others felt as though they had been pardoned and each of them breathed a sigh of relief. They quickly saluted and left. The only ones left in the small courtyard were the Governor-General's wife and the leader of the intelligence network. As for Shea's information, I've already looked through the things you brought back. Not bad. Although you all have been exposed, you still managed to complete an important task. The Governor-General's wife sighed and pulled out a booklet from the table behind her. She flipped through it and said, the information inside this booklet is quite detailed. It seems you have put in a lot of effort. Otherwise, how could I let you off so easily? The man standing before her was sweating profusely. He stood there, not daring to interrupt. The booklet in the Governor-General's wife's hand contained information that had only been gathered recently. There were no core secrets within Shea's inner circle. However, what was recorded in the booklet were information obtained from ordinary soldiers, low-ranking officers and even ins within Shea's army. Some of the information was obtained from drunken soldiers. Some came from ordinary horse grooms and cooks within Denzel City. Some even came from farmers who supplied vegetables to the garrison. Some of the information was obtained from the horse grooms within the garrison. Some of the information was obtained from Shea Thunder's horse. Those records were not classified information. However, most of them revolved around a certain topic: the Battle of Ilton County. Through the infiltration of Denzel City, the low-ranking officers who worked in the taverns and inns, the farmers who supplied the army with food, the commoners who worked in the army, the cooks who worked in the army as auxiliary soldiers, and even the low-ranking commoners who were related to the servants in the garrison, and so on from every aspect, every angle, they obtained all information regarding the Battle of Ilton County. Be it big or small, they obtained all the information they could, even the most insignificant details. Even the type of food that the army was eating, or all the information was gathered. After a thorough analysis and investigation, this booklet was produced. If Shea were here to see this booklet, he would most certainly be shocked. It was the details and hearsay from the mouths of the common soldiers. When put together, they could almost reconstruct 70 to 80% of what happened during the Battle of Ilton County. It had to be said that the best of people's intelligence work was very brilliant. After the Battle of Ilton County, the soldiers who participated in the battle would occasionally mention some details of the battle to their family members. Even if it was some seemingly unimportant information, their family members would accidentally reveal it to their friends or neighbors. This was a very common occurrence. However, the intelligence personnel of the Besta military district would go to their families and pretend to be passers-by or travelers to get close to them. Then, they would carefully extract these seemingly unimportant information. Detailed and accurate. This praise was very pertinent. However, it was precisely these seemingly unimportant details that, when put together, would be able to reveal most of what happened during the Battle of Ilton County. You've been working under me for a long time. You used to work in the military, so you're familiar with military affairs and have been doing intelligence work for many years. I'd like to hear your opinion. The governor's wife narrowed her eyes. The intelligence personnel pondered for a moment, calmed himself down, and then slowly said, "Madam, ever since General Shea Thunder defeated Odin's Scarlet Snow Army, recovered Ilton County, and pacified Corsica, his military exploits have been outstanding. He's now known as the Empire's #1 general. Even though General Adric is also a general, his military exploits are not as good as Shea Thunder's. Now on the mainland, although there are many opinions about Shea Thunder, he's undoubtedly the #1 general in the world. What he said was the truth. For the past 100 years, the Byzantine Empire had been fighting against Odin's people. Most of the time, a draw was considered a victory. Even General Adric, a mainstay of the empire, who commanded the Roadrear cavalry, the #1 elite of the empire, did not have much of an advantage against Odin's people. Someone like Shea Thunder, who was able to destroy Odin's main force in one battle, was already a great achievement that the empire had never seen in the past 100 years. Although the title of the #1 general in the world was a little shocking, it was not necessarily an exaggeration. Shea Thunder has a great reputation right now, being called the #1 general. However, this subordinate carefully analyzed it. In reality, he hasn't been in the army for long. Perhaps the other high-ranking generals in the Empire's army, such as General Adric, General Rohr, and so on, this Shea Thunder's military experience is truly too shallow. It is to the extent that this so-called general, ever since he made his debut, actually hasn't participated in many battles. From the intelligence we obtained, Shea Thunder's military career started from the Roadrear cavalry. He was discovered by Adric and taken in as a subordinate. The first time he personally experienced a battle, he acted as a scout. In that battle, he beheaded several people, obtaining a promotion. Then, during the Battle of Albacete Plains, he followed the army as a vanguard. That time, his troops were ambushed, Shea Thunder almost dying in battle. However, he was lucky enough to kill an Odin prince. Later on, he returned to the army with some of his comrades who were separated during the chaos. However, because of that injury, he stayed behind to guard the main camp, not participating in the great battle of Albacete Plains. However, this instead brought him an opportunity. During that battle, Hastings's Black Banner army launched a surprise attack from the south, crushing the Empire's eastern troop. The Black Banner army then circled around and surrounded the Roadrear cavalry's main camp. Shea Thunder's true rise to power also truly began from that battle. He organized the soldiers who stayed behind to guard the main camp, even arming the auxiliary camp, leading them to resist. There were even records of him personally going into battle against Hastings. I even heard that he injured Hastings before. This subordinate believes that this news is a bit exaggerated. At that time, Shea might not have the ability to injure Hastings. However, for him to be able to return alive under Hastings's hands is already enough to display his ability. Later on, to provide support for the main army that was withdrawing, Shea Thunder had previously gathered the miscellaneous soldiers in the camp, to the extent where I heard that he even gathered the coachmen and cooks, gathering more than 300 cavalry. At the crucial moment, he set up the camp to charge forward, providing support for the main army that was withdrawing. In that battle, he finally revealed his talent. After the battle, he was also promoted due to his merit. However, later on, due to the nobles in the kingdom taking credit for his achievements, he was almost framed. It was only under the protection of Adrik, Roer and the others that he was spared. After that, he returned to the kingdom to receive his title and was even recognized by His Majesty, Emperor Cantos. I heard that during the kingdom's hunting meet, His Majesty publicly promised him the title of Duke. When Odin's Scarlet Snow Army invaded the south, he was the military chief of Moor County at the time and was only a local officer at the level of an emblem regiment. However, he dared to single-handedly pretend to be an envoy and enter Odin's main camp to meet Manninger. He tricked Manninger into delaying the march of the army, then bought enough time for Denzel City to carry out a scorched earth strategy. Manninger's army invaded the south, but because they were unable to collect enough food, they had no choice but to retreat at Denzel City. After that, Odin's people went all the way south and wiped out Ilton County. However, Denzel City was spared, giving Shea Thunder a chance to catch his breath. Regarding the composition of the army under his command, I heard that some of them were incorporated horse gangs and some of them were mercenary tribes recruited from the Wildfire Plains. However, most of the main forces were the remnants of the original 6th and 7th Corps of the Central Army. It was the addition of these remnants of the regular army that allowed his army to take shape. Furthermore, I heard that he gathered some of the remnants of the Rodria cavalry and made his army flourish. These are the elites of his current northern army. The battle that made his name known throughout the continent was undoubtedly the Battle of Ilton County. However, in that battle, he actually did not lead a large army. According to the information we have gathered, during that battle it was Green, nicknamed Mad Dog, who led the main forces of the Northern Army to the south and confronted Manninger's army, attracting all the attention of Odin's people. Shea Thunder led a small group of cavalry and launched a surprise attack from the rear. In one battle, he seized Manninger's lair, New City, forcing Manninger to retreat. Shea Thunder once again took a risk. He did not defend the majestic city. Instead, he led a small group of his elite cavalry out of the city and ambushed Manninger's vanguard cavalry. He won the battle, causing Manninger's cavalry to be wiped out and completely lost the initiative of the battle. When Odin's people arrived at New City, Shea pretended to set the city ablaze, causing the morale of Odin's people to plummet. Madam, I have to say that Shea's luck at that time was really enviable. Although the morale of Odin's people was plummeting, their main force was still tens of thousands of infantrymen. However, their commander, Manninger, vomited blood and passed away due to illness. This caused the morale of the army to slacken and fall into chaos without a fight, giving Shea the opportunity to win. It can be said that Shea Thunder relied on 30% strength, 30% luck, and 30% risk to annihilate Odin's Scarlet Snow Army. Looking at Shea Thunder's military strategy and style, from the few instances where he participated in the battle, we can see that he is a very courageous and adventurous fellow. His few victories were all in critical situations or even in desperate strait. He would then take a risk and finally achieve victory. If it were anyone else, they would have lost all their capital long ago. However, his luck was amazing. He took a few risks and turned the situation around in critical moment. According to the information I received, during the battle in Ilton County, if he did not succeed in attacking the new city, at that time, the main force of the Northern Army led by Mad Dog Green would have been surrounded by Odin's people and the army would have almost run out of food. Thinking about that battle, if Shea Thunder's attack on the new city had failed, or if he was late by 1 or 2 days, I'm afraid that Green's main force would have been annihilated by Odin's people. At that time, no matter how much risk Shea took, there was nothing he could do. Shea Thunder is very famous now, but looking at his resume, he has never formally commanded a large army in a battle. I even doubt if he has the ability to command a large army in a battle. He seems to be very good at commanding a small group of elites to launch surprise attacks in battle. Moreover, he is very brave and has won the hearts of the army. However, according to my guess, because his resume in the army is too shallow, I'm afraid that if he really commanded a large army in battle, he wouldn't be so outstanding. Now it seems that Mad Dog Green under his command plays a very important role in the Northern Army Group. It can be said that although Shea Thunder is the leader and supreme commander of the Northern Army in name, in reality, it is Green who commands the large army in battle. As for Shea himself, he often leads a small group of elites to play the role of a vanguard general. The ability to lead troops and command can't be innate. No matter how good Shea Thunder's talent is, he has never truly commanded a large army. Therefore, I can conclude that this is his weakness. If there comes a day when the Besta people become enemies with the Northern Army, we can use this weakness of his. As long as we find a way to get rid of Mad Dog Green, the Shea Thunder Group will lose the only outstanding commander who has the ability to command a large army. There may be other outstanding military strategists in the Northern Army Group, but in terms of prestige, there won't be anyone who can replace Mad Dog Green in command of the army. Shea Thunder's outstanding point is only in his ability to launch surprise attacks and take risks. The main point is to guard against this and not give him the opportunity to take risk. We only need to use the large army's strong military strength to openly push forward and force him into a direct battle. That way, he won't be able to use his methods. In a situation where the difference in military strength is not too big, we have a 50% chance of victory in a direct battle. If Shea was here and listened to this person's long speech, he would definitely be covered in cold sweat. This analysis had almost completely seen through Shea's strengths and weaknesses. Indeed, Shea wasn't good at commanding large armies in battle. Until today, he wasn't very good at playing the role of a commander. Commanding an army of tens of thousands and coordinating all aspects, this wasn't what he was good at. In fact, Shea didn't even have the ability to do so at the moment. When the governor's wife heard this, her face was calm, neither happy nor angry. She closed her eyes and seemed to be deep in thought for a long time. When she opened her eyes again, a complicated smile had appeared at the corners of the woman's mouth. Well, you did well. The value of this information and analysis is worth more than 1,000 pieces of gold. Go to the office and withdraw 1,000 gold coins. This is my reward for you. You can go and rest. The intelligence officer immediately took his leave at the governor's wife's order, leaving the governor's wife standing alone in the courtyard. She flipped through the book in her hand again. Shea, oh Shea. I don't know if there will be a day when we will face off on the battlefield, in the Denzel City garrison residence. Shea looked at the person in front of him. The country bumpkin's eyes were wide open and his mouth was wide open. After a long time, he swallowed hard and said, You, are you really Todoro? To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 531. 8,000-word chapter. GOR Chapter 488 Theodore, who turned something rotten into something magically yes. At this moment, Todoro was standing before Shea. However, just by looking at his appearance, Shea would find it hard to recognize that this fellow was his wretched, cowardly and cunning magician servant. Duo Luo's original appearance was extremely thin and weak, and extremely wretched. In Shea's words, this fellow was simply born with the face of a pervert. Additionally, Todoro's body was originally very thin and short. Especially when standing beside Shea, who was a tall and burly man, his short and thin stature would appear even more prominent. But now, this fellow before him was half a head taller than before. Additionally, his originally thin and sunken cheeks had become rounder. At the very least, he no longer looked like a skeleton that would frighten passers-by when walking at night. Those eyes that were originally flashing with a wretched light, with more white than black, had also become much more normal. However, those pupils had faintly turned into a faint green color. Don't get me wrong, it was not the charming and melancholy green color of a lake, rather, it was the miserable green color of a frog's skin. This caused the original wretched appearance to fade away. Instead, it gave off a somewhat terrifying feeling. There was also his hair. Although Todoro was not originally bald, his hair was somewhat sparse. He was only in his 30s, yet he was already somewhat balding. Normally, when combing his hair, this fellow would carefully comb the hair on both sides of his head towards the middle to cover up this flaw. But now it would appear that this fellow's hair had suddenly become thicker. Additionally, the color of his hair appeared to be very glossy. In short, this Todoro before him, in terms of facial features, still carried traces of the past. However, his entire person appeared to be much more spirited. Tall and big, his eyes were also filled with spirit. His cheeks were full of flesh. Most importantly, this guy's eyes actually revealed a kind of confidence. Yes, that wretched, cunning and cowardly fellow's eyes revealed a sense of confidence. This was simply too heaven-defying. Shea grumbled in his heart. Then, he turned his head to look at Merlin, who had a smug smile on his face. "How did you do it? Did you finally transform this guy into something resembling a human?" "Magic, life magic." Merlin's tone was filled with pride. Todoro had already knelt in front of Shea. He hugged Shea's thigh and cried, "Master, Master, I'm your loyal servant, Todoro. I'm finally alive to see you again. You don't know, these days I've been. Thank heavens, at least his voice still sounded so wretched. Humph, Todoro, do you mean that I'm torturing you?" Merlin's eyes flashed with a cold light. Todoro immediately jumped up like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He flew behind Shea and said in a respectful tone, "You flatter me. Sir Merlin, you've groomed me and given me a new lease of life. I'll never forget that. Tell me the truth, how did you do it?" Shea looked at this new version of Todoro, his face full of curiosity. "Merlin, could it be that I told you, it's life magic." Merlin smiled proudly. "In this world, the magic that I, Merlin, do not understand has not been invented yet." Merlin then gave Shea a detailed explanation. Todoro had unexpectedly obtained the magic badge of a Grand Wizard. His body had been filled with a large amount of the Grand Wizard's magic origin power, and his consciousness had also been forcibly imprinted with a large amount of high-level magic knowledge and spells. This kind of thing had indeed temporarily transformed this fellow into a magic expert. Todoro himself was naturally extremely proud, his head full of dreams of becoming a great master. But soon, Merlin poured a bucket of cold water on him. "Your current magic power does not belong to you. It's stored in the badge. Your own magic attainments are still very shallow, and once you use up all this magic power that does not belong to you, you'll be beaten back to your original state. With your own meager magic power, even if you know so many high-level magic spells, you won't be able to use them. At that time, you'll still be a good-for-nothing." This immediately shattered Todoro's dream of becoming a master. However, based on your current situation, he thought of a possible solution. Simply put, Todoro had previously cultivated life magic, and at the cost of half of his life force, he had cultivated the most basic first-level life magic. But unfortunately, the cultivation method left behind by the founder of life magic, Master Hilafenkia, was originally an incomplete version. Cultivating this incomplete version of life magic would consume the cultivator's life force. After cultivating it, every time he used life magic in the future, he would also consume his life force. This meant that every time a mage who cultivated life magic used magic, it was equivalent to a slow suicide. How much life force could a person have? Therefore, even if he had cultivated life magic to beginner level, it would not have much practical effect on Todoro's strength. After all, every time he used magic, he would consume his life force. How could a coward like Todoro use this kind of magic so easily? Of course, there was only one advantage. Anyone who cultivated life magic would immediately maintain their appearance at the same age as when they cultivated it. They wouldn't age for the rest of their lives, and would only age rapidly when their lifespan reached its end. Todoro was very lucky that Merlin was also said to be a master wizard who was proficient in life magic. It was said that in Merlin's life, the person he admired the most in the field of magic was the founder of life magic, Hilifenkia. That person who claimed, "If you give me a flock of sheep, I can challenge a sacred magus. If you give me a flock of sheep, I can even challenge a more powerful existence." That legendary magic madman who had once caused panic in the entire world. When Merlin was young, he had even single-handedly broken into the magic academy of the church's headquarters in the capital of the Byzantine Empire and challenged several great wizards. In the end, his tyrannical strength made the church helpless, and he took away many of the notes and information left behind by Hilifenkia when he was alive. Todoro's situation had aroused Merlin's great interest. After all, how to turn a good-for-nothing into a magic expert was also an extremely challenging matter for a madman like Merlin. Therefore, Todoro became Merlin's test subject. In his idea of how to transform Todoro, Merlin's initial train of thought was how to maximize the power of Todoro's fortuitous encounter. How to maximize the use of the large amount of pure magic stored in the magic badge that Todoro had obtained to turn him into an expert. However, this train of thought quickly reached a dead end. After all, Todoro's own magic attainments were too weak. While the external magic was being consumed when casting spells, he himself was unable to replenish the new magic through meditation. In Merlin's words, with so many high-level magic spells stored in Todoro's mind, even if he randomly picked the worst one, if he had to rely on his own magic to cast it, he would have to meditate and accumulate magic for 200 years every time he cast it. Merlin was also helpless with regards to Todoro's own magic attainments. After all, she was also a human and not a god. A wizard's talent in magic cultivation, the sensing of magical elements, the control of magic, and the cultivation of magic during meditation all required a certain amount of talent. Those without talent would not be able to do it no matter how diligent they were. Todoro's problem was that once the external magic he had obtained was used up, he would be beaten back to his original state. Even if his head was full of magic spells at the level of a wizard master, he would not be able to cast a single one. In the end, Merlin thought for a long time before finally focusing on life magic. Todoro had cultivated life magic before, and he had paid the price of half of his life force. Unfortunately, because he was too weak, even if he had paid such a huge price, he had only obtained the ability of beginner life magic. However, Merlin had opened up a train of thought on this point. The problem Todoro was facing was that although he had magical knowledge and mastered a large number of high-level magic spells, he did not have the corresponding high-level magic to cast them. It was like a person who had a stomach full of martial arts' ultimate skills, but was a disabled person with broken arms and legs. What he needs is only magic. One of the characteristics of life magic was that as a magical genius of a generation, Hilifenkia's greatest contribution was to break through the threshold of magic cultivation. All along, if one wanted to cultivate magic, they must have magical talent. For those without talent, no matter how hard they worked, it was useless. Just the cultivation of magic alone blocked 99% of people from entering the world of magic. However, Hilafenkia's life magic was that even if one did not use meditation or other methods to cultivate magic, one could still use life force to exchange for magic. Since Todoro himself could not cultivate powerful magic, then, there was no harm in using the method of life magic, using life force to exchange for magic. This was Merlin's train of thought. However, this led to the second problem. Todoro's body was weak, and his life force was not strong. Moreover, even if it was not Todoro, but someone with a strong body, it would be impossible to become a master wizard if they only relied on consuming their own life force. After all, if one wanted to cast a high-level spell, they would need a large amount of magic. No one could possibly have so much life force to squander. In the past, Master Hilafenkia solved this problem. He created a complete version of life magic that could absorb the life force of any living thing around him for his own use. This kind of magic was really a terrifying existence. In theory, as long as there was a living thing around him, then his own magic was unlimited. But it was a pity that the cultivation method of life magic left behind by Hilafenkia was incomplete. He didn't leave the method of absorbing the life force of other living things to the later generations. Perhaps the master magician himself also realized that if such a terrifying method were to spread, it would cause huge turmoil and chaos. Therefore, Todoro's life force was too weak and could not be exchanged for enough magic. Although Merlin was also a magic genius of a generation, she had not been able to figure out how Hilafenkia did it in the past after many years of research. She also could not restore the complete version of Hilafenkia's life magic. In that case, since Todoro's life force was too weak, Merlin set her mind on how to increase this guy's life force. After careful research, Merlin quickly drew up a Todoro transformation plan. We usually say life force or life force. But how many people really understand what life force is? Merlin looked at Shea and smiled proudly. Life force is probably a person's lifespan? Shea touched his chin. Yes and no. You're too biased. You're only right a little. Merlin's face carried her unique arrogance and confidence. I started studying the various documents left behind by Hilafenkia many years ago. I didn't directly study his life magic like others, trying to find clues from the incomplete version to speculate what the complete version was like. That approach is too stupid. Hilafenkia was a genius of a generation. Since he had the intention to hide, how could he leave such obvious clues for people? So, for many years, the direction of my research has not been on magic itself, but on the study of life force. What exactly is life force? This question is actually very complicated. Life force is just a word in the eyes of ordinary people, but in fact, this word contains too much content. For most creatures, life force includes all areas of the body's structure. Merlin's speaking speed became very slow. For example, is your heart strong enough? Are your lungs healthy enough? If your lungs aren't healthy enough, there will be breathing problems, and your body will naturally be weak. If your body is weak, then your life force will naturally be weak. Also, are your stomach and intestines healthy enough? Otherwise, you'll have indigestion and absorb energy from food, which will also cause your life force to be weak. Even your skin, your hair, your hearing, vision, smell, and so on. After countless years of research, I finally discovered that blood actually occupies the largest proportion of life force. Blood. The blood of any creature is much more important than most of the other parts of the body. If you don't believe me, you can imagine a person who has no eyes, no nose, no ears, no tongue, and no mouth. Even without limbs, or someone who is injured on the battlefield and whose internal organs are damaged can still barely survive. I've traveled extensively in my life, and I've even heard of people who cut off half of their lungs and could still continue to live for a period of time. However, blood is the only exception. Any person, any living creature, without blood, will die immediately. Without a doubt. Even the loss of blood will make people weak. You're a soldier, so you should know that even if a person's injury is not fatal on the battlefield, if the bleeding can't be stopped and excessive blood loss can cause death. Therefore, the importance of blood is unquestionable. I believe that blood occupies a very important part of the composition of life force. Thus, I began to study blood. Merlin's tone carried a hint of authority. I've discovered that although human blood looks red, if you analyze it carefully, you'll find that there's a huge difference between them. For example, I found out that there are differences in the blood of healthy people and sick people. Although I still can't fully understand what the different components in blood are, it doesn't matter. As long as I have this discovery, I can start to experiment. To modify Todoro, and let him obtain more life force, Merlin began to work on blood. Since Todoro's life force was too weak, then there was no harm in changing some of his blood. Thus, Merlin began to think of a question. In this world, which creature's life force was the strongest? Without a doubt, the first thing that jumped into Merlin's mind was the dragon tribe. The dragon tribe's life force had always been the top of many races. The dragon tribe with strong life force generally had a lifespan of hundreds of years, and a few powerful dragon tribes could even live for thousands or even thousands of years. Then, what if the blood in Todoro's body was changed to dragon's blood? Would he be able to live longer because of this? Merlin was a person who did what he thought. However, the problem was, she did not have that much dragon's blood in her hands. As a top wizard who had traveled extensively for many years, Merlin certainly had some dragon's blood in her hands. After all, dragon's blood was also a precious magic material. However, she did not have much stock in her hands. If she wanted to change Todoro's blood, the little she had was far from enough. Was she going to hunt a dragon specifically for this? Merlin had the ability to do this, but she did not have the time and patience. Running to the far north, looking for the dragon tribe, and then hunting a dragon back, even for Merlin, such a task was a little difficult. Thus, she quickly thought of a substitute. Demandras. That big snake. Among all the races, Demandras was considered to have the closest blood relationship with the dragon tribe. Moreover, the Demandras in Merlin's hands was an experimental product of the goblins' creation god area. It had been modified by the ancient goblins through a mysterious method, and its lifespan was exceptionally long. With such a living thing in her hands, she naturally had to make good use of it. You changed Todoro's blood with Demandra's blood? Shea was completely shocked. Of course it's not that simple. Merlin rolled her eyes and said, "Do you think changing blood is an easy thing to do? Let me tell you, in the beginning, I hastily changed him with Demandra's blood. As a result, he almost died. It's 26 times. I almost died 26 times, Todoro whispered. Shea was not interested in listening to this fellow's complaints. His curiosity had been aroused. How did you do it? I can't tell you the specifics. Your knowledge of blood and biology is too shallow. I'm not in the mood to teach you this kind of lesson. In short, I racked my brains and tried many methods that I know and even I don't know. In the end, I finally succeeded in my experiment." Having said that, Merlin looked at Shea and said, "For this, I have to thank you properly." "Thank me?" Shea was at a loss. "Yes, thank you. Do you remember the last time you ran into my laboratory and interrupted my work?" Merlin laughed. "At that time, my experiments had failed countless times. I was even about to give up. However, after seeing you, I suddenly remembered something." "Me? Demandras?" After all, Shea was not stupid. He quickly thought of something. "Life-sharing?" "You guessed it." Merlin smiled happily. When Shea and the others entered Demandras's lair and had a hard battle with him, they had pierced Demandras's body with a flaming fork at the critical moment. As a result, they had inadvertently triggered the life-sharing contract. That was purely an accident, because Xiaoya's flaming fork was a divine artifact, hiding an astonishing mystical power. When Shea was cultivating the crimson murder aura, he had established a magical connection with the fire fork. In addition, Shea's move to attack Demandra's was Dragon Thrust. Dragon Thrust was the unique skill of the ancient human Dragon Knight. The Dragon Knight was created to allow humans to establish a contract with the powerful Dragon tribe. Dragon Thrust, the unique skill of the Dragon Knight, naturally had some element that could trigger the power of the contract between humans and dragons. During the battle, Shea used the fire fork to unleash Dragon Thrust. After stabbing into Demandra's body, an accident occurred. The fire fork absorbed Demandra's vitality and transferred it to Shea. As a result, in that battle, Shea, whose strength was far inferior to Demandra's at that time, was able to fight evenly with the big snake. It should be noted here that the life-sharing contract between Shea and Demandra's was later removed. At that time, Shea was urged by Merlin to cultivate blood rage and unleashed his potential to defeat the son of the Emperor God Odin. As a result, his body's life order was in chaos and was on the verge of collapse. After that incident, his body had undergone tremendous changes after he recovered. The effect of the dragon's blood was gone, and so was the life-sharing contract. Since I've thought of this method, the rest is much simpler. That little snake is in my hands, so I let Todoro establish a life-sharing contract with him. Merlin's tone was relaxed when he said this. Indeed, it was very easy. Demandra's had fallen into the hands of this terrifying woman, Merlin, and could neither live nor die. Could Merlin not do whatever he wanted with it? Demandra's had molted 9 times and was almost as perfect as the Golden Dragon tribe. How strong was its life force? Legend had it that the Golden Dragon tribe was the strongest among the Dragon tribe. The lifespan of a golden dragon could reach thousands of years. In the end, after Demandra's was forced by Merlin to establish a life-sharing contract with Todoro, but life-sharing has a distance limit. If the distance between the two parties is too far, the life-sharing contract can't be triggered. Moreover, even if it's something like Demandra's, no matter how strong its life force is, it's still limited. It's not inexhaustible. Demandra's can live for thousands of years. Even if its physique and physical strength are taken into account, even if its life force is thousands of times stronger than an ordinary human, it's not infinite. Todoro shares life with it and uses Demandra's life force in exchange for magic power. There will be a time when it will be exhausted. It's just that it can last a little longer. Shea frowned. Blood. Shea, didn't you hear what I said just now? I've told you so much about blood just now. Idiot. Merlin rolled his eyes. You're really an idiot. Have you forgotten what happened when you established life-sharing contract with Demandra's? At that time, Demandra's couldn't hurt you anymore. No matter what power or magic power it uses, it can't hurt you. Because, under the principle of the life-sharing contract, you and it are considered a community. Even if its breath landed on your body, you wouldn't be hurt at all. That's the most important thing. Merlin looked at Shea, who seemed to be deep in thought. Do you think I let Todoro and Demandra's establish life-sharing contract just to let Todoro share a little bit of Demandra's life force? Don't I know that even someone as strong as Demandra's has a limited life force? If you can think of this, do you think I can't? Shea abruptly slapped his head. It's blood. Under the life-sharing contract, Todoro and Demandra's will become a community. It looks like Demandra's blood can be swapped into Todoro's body. That's right. Merlin finally nodded. After establishing life-sharing contract, I swapped Demandra's blood into Todoro's body. Todoro's life is no longer in danger. His body also didn't show any adverse reactions or rejection. Everything seems to be fine. After swapping in the blood of a race with a strong life force, the blood quickly transformed his body. He became taller and his appearance changed. The powerful blood caused his life force to flourish. Look at this fellow. Even his strength is much greater than before. I can tell you that after Demandra's blood transfused into his body, his current body structure has become very strong and healthy. It won't be a problem even if he lives for another few hundred years. The next thing is simple. Todoro's life force doesn't come from himself, but from Demandra's blood. So, we did an experiment. Once he uses life-sharing magic and converts his life force into magic power, the blood of Demandra's in his body will become thinner and slowly disappear. Merlin smiled. Fortunately, although his life force isn't infinite, we have Demandra's. His blood, to a certain extent, is infinite. Shea understood this very easily. He had experienced many battles. Many injured warriors had become weak due to excessive blood loss. However, as long as they recuperated for a period of time and ate more good food, the blood loss would be replenished after a period of time. Blood could be regenerated by itself. In that case, to maintain Todoro's magic power, it was not to let Todoro directly share Demandra's life force. It was to let him share Demandra's blood. As long as this premise existed, every time Todoro used life-sharing magic and exhausted his magic power, he would immediately transfer Demandra's blood to obtain vigorous life force, which could then be converted into magic power again. As for Demandra's, it was a primordial demon. After 9 molts, it was a perfect form comparable to a golden dragon. Given how large its true form was, it was not even worth mentioning to give Theodore, a tiny fellow with such a small body. Even if he lost a little more, he would at most let it rest for a while, and it would recover after a while. In fact, Merlin had been doing this for the past few days. She let Demandra's transfuse Todoro's blood for many days. Every time, she let Todoro immediately convert the life force brought by Demandra's blood into magic power and store it all in the magic badge. This process was repeated many times. A considerable amount of magic power had been stored in the magic badge. It was enough for Todoro to squander for a while as a master. As for Demandra's, its originally majestic body had become much weaker after many days of blood transfusion. One could only imagine how much blood Merlin had given it. Even such a huge Demandra's had become weak due to blood loss. The magic power stored is enough for this guy to use for a long time. When it is used up, Demandra's should have recovered by then. Then, I can continue the blood transfusion. Merlin's face was filled with pride as he said, "Now, I'm not giving you back the original Theodore. I'm giving you a genuine magic master." They were shocked by Merlin's power. He could actually turn something rotten into something magical. He had transformed the originally useless Todoro into a magic master. According to Merlin, before Theodore's magic power was exhausted, his current strength was already comparable to that of a high-grade magus. Of course, he was even more powerful than a high-grade magus. That was because he had mastered several top-grade magic spells that only Grand Magi could use. One of them was a forbidden spell. However, Merlin also pointed out that, to cast a forbidden spell, the amount of magic power consumed was huge. With Todoro's current state, even if he used up all the magic power stored in the magic badge, it would not be enough to cast a forbidden spell. Unless he wants to die, it's best not to have such thoughts. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support legal reading. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.